And welcome to session number 5. Yes, who knew we are past the halfway mark, everybody? Absolutely fantastic. We are into session number 5 of 8 of the 2022 Responsible Raw Materials Conference, during which we are exploring the concept of mining being one of those key mechanisms that needs to be used to unlock a truly just energy transition. So through the course of this week, we have been listening and engaging with a whole wide variety of different speakers. We've had people who spend their lives looking at those rocks, or I should say licking those rocks out there in the wilds, really trying to ascertain what do we need to dig out of the ground. We've got people who invest in those mining companies. We've got people who are experts at processing those materials, people who come from further down that circular economy with regards to the design of the batteries, the recycling of all of this material. If you haven't heard them yet this week, don't worry, we've got them teed up for you later on in the week. We've had government officials, policy writers, regulators. Who else have we had? Lawyers, accountants. We've had all kinds of wonderful people. We've had people who really don't like mining. We've had people who really do like mining. And this is fantastic because it means that we can come together, we can share our ideas, we can share our concerns, listen to one another, because it's through that listening that we can perhaps find some of that constructive momentum to be able to move forwards. Now, with regards to all of this, okay, for those of you who have been dialing in diligently over the course of the last few days, you will have seen all of this already. But what I'm going to do is just quickly share my screen to show you where you can go to find all of this material. So if you have found us by accident on the internet, this is how to find us more formally. So here's the website, responsiblerawmaterials.com. If you click on the 2022 conference, you will come to this page here. You can, of course, you can still sign up for free. The sign up is still very much open. And I think, Rose, we've had lots of people signing up every day as well, which is great. So you can sign up for free. And then if I keep scrolling down, you will find the schedule. So we are currently in here. So we're currently in Wednesday afternoon, and these are the fabulous speakers. And in fact, to be honest, we don't just have one speaker for these slots. In some of them, we've got 4 speakers, which is very exciting. So we've got lots of fabulous people lined up for you this afternoon. But also, if you go and click on the abstracts can be found here button, so click on that, or alternatively, go up to the top and click on talks, and it'll take you to the same place. And what you will find in here are a whole load of abstracts, some of which you will see that there are some videos have been loaded in. So if I go and take a look at the Tuesday afternoon panel session, so this was this time yesterday, and I click on that, what you will find is we've already loaded in the panel session from yesterday. So if you want to go back and watch the video of what on earth it was we discussed at the end of yesterday's session, you can go there and click on that. Also, if I just go back one, what you will see is some of our fabulous speakers have also provided us with abstracts. So let me just cascade down here a little bit. So let me click on Andy's abstract. Okay, so as you can see, Andy was great and he provided us with just some background information with regards to what he was going to talk about. Then there's his talk. That's a rather unfortunate picture of myself on that screen, but this is Andy giving his presentation, believe it or not. And then a bit of a biography with regards to who Andy is. So if you want to get in contact with him, you can. And so all of these have been uploaded. We are up to date as of everything up to the end of yesterday, and over the course of the next few hours, all of the videos for this morning's session will be uploaded as well. So if you want to go in and catch up on some of the talks that you maybe missed earlier on today, please do feel free to go and do that by going into this area here. You'll see it'll be constantly updating, so you need to hit refresh, because I guarantee you there will be an update every 2 seconds. So make sure you hit the refresh button and you will see all of the extra material being loaded in there. Now, with regards to all of these talks, they are of course all worth going and listening, but there is one that is really, really fascinating, and that is the Burst the Bubble session from this time yesterday, where we were joined by 3 incredibly courageous individuals who do not come from the mining sector at all. They don't invest in the mining sector. They don't work downstream of the mining sector, nothing like that. However, they are people with opinions and perspectives. And of course, as you can see, they've all got material stuff round about them. And so what we've got here is a discussion that we had with them yesterday, where we said, well, what do you think of mining? What does it mean to you? And if you watch nothing else over the course of this week, this is well worth a watch, because it's incredibly powerful listening to what they say. And we did a similar session last year, which is also called Burst the Bubble. And let me just show you how you can find that. So actually, if you just go up to the top, you'll see there's a little searching, little magnifying glass. And if I just say burst, it'll be something like that. That was the title of it. A little bit of thinking. Okay, there we go. So this is the one from last year, May 13th, 2021. I'll click on that. This is what people said last year about the mining sector. So it's a really interesting little dipstick check with regards to what do people think about the mining sector. So well worth a little look. The other thing as well is thank you very much to those of you who have dialed in on Zoom. Absolutely fantastic to see you as always. But we've also got some people that have dialed in on YouTube. So in terms of finding us on YouTube, so we are just Responsible Raw Materials, and then click on this little live button up here. And this is going to get really weird because there we go. It's running about 20 seconds behind where we really are in the real world. But do feel free to watch us on YouTube instead of Zoom if you should so desire. Different platforms work differently for different people, so that's totally okay. If you are watching us on YouTube, please feel free to engage us in the chat. We welcome all of your comments and your ideas, and we will try and bring them into the main discussion where possible. We're also keeping an eye on Twitter, LinkedIn, TikTok. We don't have a Facebook account, but basic smoke signals, carrier pigeons, anything else you can desire, feel free to send us through messages. I see people nodding sagely. We will try and bring all of those different perspectives to the room. The other thing as well is, of course, if you are in Zoom, as always, so the little chat button at the bottom of the screen, make sure you've got that clicked on, because people will be sharing links with one another, different ideas, all of which we will be unashamedly harvesting so that we can then share them as a collective when we get to the end of the week. So Ludovine and Rose and the rest of the team are taking good notes of all of those. So we'll be able to collate them into a central blog at the end of the week. Also, if you are in Zoom, please do feel free to make use of the Q&A. So Q&A or chat, all of that is fair game. All of it is as open as possible. Our only caveat is that if anybody is naughty, as in disrespectful of one another, then we will need to start clamping down on people's privileges. So you have been warned. Okay, please don't be naughty. Though I say with, again, much love and respect. If for some bizarre reason someone is really naughty and we have an uninvited guest who decides to start playing all kinds of nasty videos or something like that, then we will immediately kill the Zoom and we will send out to you replacement details. Okay, so keep an eye on your emails. Okay, so you know what the rules of the game are. Basically, we want to be as open and as collaborative and as constructive, but also as challenging as possible with one another, because the topics of conversation that we're dealing with here do actually require a huge amount of challenge. But also, please make sure that you are respectful to one another, because of course, all opinions are welcome here, and we just need to make sure we have a nice, happy, constructive vibe in our room. So that's a little bit of a background with regards to what we've been up to over the last few days. As you can see on the screen, I am surrounded by a phenomenal array of wonderful people. What we're going to do is we're going to work our way just quickly around the room. And so if you guys want to turn your cameras on, if you are there at the moment, and what I will do is, so Matt, perhaps if I come to yourself first, I'll come to you and say, do you want to introduce yourself? Where are you from? And then perhaps something that you're looking to either get out of this afternoon, or what are you bringing to the table? So we'll go to Matt first, and then we'll go to Emma.
Hi, my name's Matt Grimshaw. I'm an exploration geologist based up in Leeds, probably tell by accent. I've probably got about 8 years of experience in research and consulting, and kind of the stereotype of what I do is kind of being out on the ground, sniffing and licking rocks, as you said before, Sarah. And just I guess over the last few years, I've kind of got to this point where I've started to get increasingly frustrated with the feeling of being kind of trapped in a career path where my values aren't starting to feel quite conflicted. So over the last few years, I've started to try to transition, not the transition we're talking about here, but and try and play more of an active role in making changes in the things that I kind of believe in. So I'm finding it very engaging coming to events like this where I'm outside of my specialist niche, speaking and broadening my kind of opportunities and interests, and it's incredibly rewarding. So I look forward to more chats this afternoon. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Matt. Emma, do you want to say hello to everyone? And then we'll go to Maria.
Yeah, great. My name is Emer Caston. So I am a geologist and I have worked, I suppose, in the energy sector for most of my career. A little bit like Matt on the transitioning side, I've kind of moved into the sustainability realm and relatively new to mining, but the organization I work for is ICRAG. So we're around geoscience for sustainable solutions, including and very much part of that being the mineral sector and how we can advance sustainable societies, environment and economy. That said, it is quite new and I am really interested, I suppose, in the cross learnings from the various geosectors around sustainability, around just transition. So I'll be talking about the, together with Mariangela Capello and Ludovine Wilters and Denise Cox, we will together be talking about the Geoscience Sustainability Atlas.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Emma. Now, Emma has stolen the wind out of your sails, Maria, there. But do you want to say hello to everybody? And then we'll go to Denise.
Sure. Hello, everybody from Houston, Texas. I'm very happy to be in this conference. I think the best it has is the way it connects everybody on a very enriching platform. I am a geophysicist myself, and my passion, I would say, is to inspire the new generation. And to do that, I am advocating for sustainability and how geosciences, my core expertise, relates to sustainability. So that's what I do. And I have my own consulting firm, Red Tree Consulting, and I am also vice president of RESI, which is a company that monitors the storage of CO2 with geophysics methods. So thank you, everybody.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much, Maria. And my other half is in Houston at the moment, so I hear it's very hot with you.
Yes, it is.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Maria. Denise, do you want to say hello to everybody? And then we will go to Norm.
Hi, I'm Denise Cox, and I am president of Storm Energy. We are a small exploration company and development company, and currently we are morphing into a technology company looking for sustainable development solutions to sustainable development through technology. And I'm very interested now in high resolution aeromagnetics to detect what are called orphaned oil and gas wells, and that are wells that were drilled at the turn of the century that we don't have accurate locations to. So that's just one aspect of what Storm Energy does. But what I really love is what we are all doing with the Sustainability Atlas, and that is giving a voice to the geoscientists and their important role in developing all types of energy. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Denise. Absolutely brilliant. Cool. Norm, do you want to say hello to everyone? And then we'll go to Peter.
Hi, everybody. Nice to be here. My third year in a row in this conference. It's a fabulous conference. Better every year. I'm a civil engineer. I grew up in Maine, in USA, and I was in consulting for over 20 years, environmental consulting, and then I jumped into the mining world, and I have been in various locations in the world of mining in Latin America. I was a general manager at an underground mine for a few years. I was a sustainability manager with Anglo American, where I met Sarah, working on projects in Latin America as well as Alaska. And over the last 3 years, I've been working as a risk management consultant. Full disclosure, I am an associate with Satala, and I also work independently. And I'm also here to represent the Maine Lithium Communicators, which will be one of our talks in about 40 minutes with Peter Arnold. There are 5 of us in this group. It's a volunteer group, and I'll say more about it as we go forward. And our desire is to communicate. And I mean two-way communication, obviously. I mean talk, listen, understand. Because, as we'll explain, we have challenges to mining in Maine, in our home state. where Peter and I were both born. Great to be here. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much for that, Norm. Fantastic. And Peter, do you want to say hello to everybody, given that you are part of Norm's team? Oh, and you're on mute at the moment. There we go. Yeah, on you go.
Okay. Thank you. Like Norm, I'm from Maine, and I think of myself as a promoter now. It's been a promoter of renewable energy. But I'm backing up to think about how you get the materials to do renewable energy. But from a bigger promotional place, Maine is a very environmentally conservative state. And I've been thinking about how to get this message to the whole audience, all of the citizens of Maine, because that mining can be blocked at the smallest level in Maine. So how can we get this message to the people that can open their minds to these changes, the just transition? There you go.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Peter. Really, really good to have you here with us. Great. Rowan, do you want to say a quick hello to everybody? And then we'll go to Ludovine.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rowan, and I am also an exploration geologist. I've been in the industry now for 10 years, and I'm more at home in a jungle or up a mountain than I am in my office wearing a shirt. But I've become more and more involved in the sustainability, ESG aspect of geology and exploration. And I've worked with Sarah and Rose, also giving talks and supporting the Critical Raw Materials Conference last year, and trying to bridge that gap in understanding between the general public and the mining industry and the raw materials industry, and how we need to improve understanding from our perspective in the exploration mining industry, and how it's critical to the green energy transition. So like Matt, I've almost kind of transitioned a little bit too, from being a purely rock mud licking person to working with other groups and organizations to improve understanding as to the importance of the industry and the ESG aspects of our industry.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that, Rowan. Brilliant. And Ludovine, do you want to say hello? And then a very quick hello from Rose. I know that we are just shuggling things behind the scenes quickly.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Well, I am Ludovine Vluters. I'm a consultant in governance, policy, and strategy matters, primarily for extractive companies and the investors who fund them. And I just want to go right on the record and say I am a friend of geoscientists and geosciences right there. So we start with that. I have been very honored to be part of the team that's working on the Geosciences Sustainability Atlas, bringing more of a policy angle. And generally, I am also working with Sarah, Rose, and the rest of the team on structuring responsible raw materials into a not-for-profit entity, and hopefully developing it even beyond this amazing forum that we have today. So lots going on, and I think all positive for sustainability.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Ludovine. And Rose, do you want to say a quick hello? And then this is beautiful timing, because then we will introduce Anna and we'll be able to go straight into her talk if she's up for going for that. Rose, do you want to say a quick hello?
Sure. Hi everyone, I'm Rose. I'm the other part of Responsible Materials. I am also a geologist, also increasingly in the sustainability sector. So I think there's a bit of a theme going on. Yeah, we work hard to try and get this out there, and we're really happy to have this group of people with us this afternoon as we go into the second half of not just the day but the week. So we're looking forward to this afternoon, and I'll let Sarah crack on with her fantastic host.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Rose. And yes, so that then takes us straight into the fabulous Anna, who was probably totally unaware of this conference until maybe Monday evening, when her friend Andy Reynolds, let's just dump him totally in it, sent her an email to say, hey, I think you need to take part in this discussion. And Anna, you have been truly amazing, because you were like, yeah, sure, I'm up for it. And have come and joined us here today. So our first speaker for this afternoon, and your lighting looks beautiful. It's all good. Is the fantastic Anna Poporesnia, and I'm sorry, I've probably totally mispronounced your surname there. Anna, actually, I'll tell you what, I'm going to let Anna introduce herself and what she's going to be talking about, and then we'll all be able to jump in with questions afterwards. So Anna, if you've got a presentation that you want to share, if not, we can share it from our side. What would you prefer us to do?
Hi, everyone. I've got it here. You've got it as well, Sam. I think the share screen button works well. I can see it actually, yeah. So happy to do that. But let me be not that rude and introduce myself. Thank you for having me, everyone. Yes, indeed, it was a very short notice, but it's not that short because Sarah knows me since 2019, ESG seminar, webinar, practical workshop that was launched. I remember that cohort, Christopher Rees, Sarah, absolutely amazing people who were driving the changes in Geological Survey Society in London. I can see Norman Gridley, who's been mentoring me as well and introducing me the operational particles in mining, leaching and everything, and trying to get me out of the rabbit holes. So long story short, I'm the tech entrepreneur. I'm coming from construction industry, which resembles me a lot mining, where engineers are engineers, architects are geologists, and a lot of similarities. And so it's all about the constructing and mining the value and delivering the true value as well. So in that journey, I embarked myself on the technology innovation. There's a lot of fancy words like supply chain management, blockchain transparency, trust, fintech, supply chain finance. You probably all heard also the venture called MineHub. That was one of the ventures that actually landed me in mining. Before I was looking into the natural resource management from the water perspective, integrated water resource management. So my ultimate actually task or goal or outcome I'm trying to achieve here is and to embark with all of you on the journey here. It's a collective task, and I'll share probably with you here. Let me know if you can see the presentation.
Yep, it's all brilliant.
Yes, okay, cool. So, fantastic. So, I mean, the transformative journey of mining. So I've been trying to combine these three aspects before I came here. So it's natural resource management, sustainable natural resource management, fintech, and the community-centric approach to deliver the nature positive outcomes. So it took me some time to understand actually how it's going to look like. So, and what I found out recently, so after all these rabbit holes that I've been to, we don't really lack anything. We have everything sufficient. We have amazing people. We have some innovative companies and innovative business models. What we do really lack is there is a lack of the change at scale and the replicable to deliver the change fast and at scale. And extractive industries, be it oil and gas, be it mining, well, as you can see the statistics, the extraction has tripled and it's going to grow, and there is a big disconnect between all these mega projects, mega factories, be it Tesla, be it anything else. However, we still can see that we haven't lifted at the same pace people from the poverty and haven't delivered the true change and relocation, not of just their natural resources, but of the bells at the same pace. And I think this is where the difference can be made and changes can happen. And how to do that? So basically, it's a very, very old thing. I think conservation, restoration, regeneration is a way to go. And for mining industry, or generally the extractive industry and energy isn't part of this change. And it's a very old concept. It's been promoted since a very old time when Roosevelt started building up the national parks and realized quickly that true industrialization without true conservation are not going to deliver sustainable development, not going to deliver sustainable change in the long run. And this is where we are. So now we have a lot of fancy words, a lot of interesting methodologies and approaches, be it circular, be it nature positive solutions, be it nature-based solutions, and so on and so forth. But the question here is why they're not there. And that's what I was trying to understand in the last couple of years, speaking to the different stakeholders, communities, indigenous people, trying to help them with their water rights, trying to understand the mining trade-offs in the water space, trying to understand the government position, be it Chile, be it Ecuador, trying to speak to their experts like yourself to connect it to the integrated risk perspective, and of course trying to understand the investment space, which hasn't changed at all so much, especially the mining investment change, who are very much consistent in asking their own questions in terms of what is a CapEx, what is an IRR, what is an NPV here, regardless whether there are outcomes which are focused not just on their regardless of they don't not necessarily fixed on the outcomes they necessarily fixed on the outputs. And I think this is a huge disconnect, but I also see it's a huge opportunity as well, because personally I witnessed recently in the investment mining conference several amazing startups or mining companies where they're no longer mining, they're transforming themselves, where they're presenting their outcomes and the questions just didn't catch up with them. Questions like, do you have other baskets in your, other commodities in your baskets? And I was like, yeah, that's incomplete picture. So how do we unlock what Sarah has been promoting here, this thing, right? So, and I think this is where the mining this is where the industry is, right? It's not just mining, I'd say. I think it's the same applies to infrastructure, the same applies to construction, the same applies to any heavy industries or generally industries. And of course, mining at the heart, because partially it enables, partially it drives, and of course, partially it's just a supplier. So there is a bigger picture in this. And this is the bigger picture I've been working myself as well. And it was extremely challenging to connect the dots. So we've got only one planet. There is no planet B. And mining industry taught me big way about the practicality. And this is what I really, really appreciate, be it mining, construction. So, however, the overexploitation cost, which is externalized and is not put on the balance sheet, is roughly half of our global GDP. And quite often it just wiped into their balance sheets as a part of the trade-offs. But if we actually step back a bit and then we actually see it at the larger scale, it's actually huge. And how we actually can deliver value, and there are answers. It just wasn't matter how to build that pathway, how to turn those risks into those and to grasp those opportunities. And Sarah has invited here really some amazing use cases and best practices at doing that. So our task, I think, here is to build it up from there and to show how to deliver the business value. It's not necessarily 10 trillion a year is going to be just within extractives. Extractives is roughly 1/3 of that. And in terms of the jobs of creation, it's going to be roughly around 90 mil. But it's all possible. And so to do the reality check here as well, where is mining right now in terms of their, as a generalized situation, right? And we're not talking about some independent individual companies, but it sits somewhere at the net zero, where some of the end consumers of mining, if we look at the value chain or if we look at the supply chain, I look from the perspective of value chain. A lot of companies still consider it from the supply chain. Doesn't really matter. They sit already in the impact creation, not just ESG, not just as their sustainable development, which is impact as well, but somewhere looking into the net positive. I mean, everyone respects, a lot of people respect Tesla. I'm not going to go into the controversies around its water. there is a lot of aspects. However, what I'm here to point out is impact reporting. And the next stage will be impact. The next stage will be, of course, restoration, regeneration, which got to be included. So we can see a huge disconnect in the supply chain, not only from the perspective of the trust, transparency, responsible mining, responsible sourcing, but we also see a huge disconnect between the practices and processes within the same actually value chain. And I think there is a lot of reconciliation work processes can be done within the industry, within the consortia, and that's the best one of the best approaches which I have seen in the tech space. And I think Andy Reynolds also mentioned that the sort of the lean way or agile. There are so many ways how to call it. How to actually move that red pin from net zero into actually and build it up and actually move from the net zero thinking. And I will not be ashamed to say it, because in the investment world, it's very much often called, and I will quote even Responsible Investor recently a publication, it's called net zero bullshit. Why is it so? Is because we've got we need to keep in mind that we have one planet. And coming back to this point, we actually cannot follow that trend of net zero, because it's not going to bring us too far. And it's not going to bring us too far in terms of this unlocking sustainable development world and regenerative world, which is Sarah also is mentioning, and we seem to share all of that. So how to achieve that? There are different ways, and I think some of those were mentioned in this conference already. So there is a digital aspect and there is a physical aspect. Physical aspect, what I mean is that it's technological, it's engineering solutions which are based on their closed loop technical solutions and engineering solutions and technologies, be it energy, green energy, renewable energy, hydrogen solutions, be it closed loop production systems, be it eco-industrial cluster developments, which we can see broadly developing in the European Union, and there are some also being developed in Australia. However, that's all not possible if we don't have data, because what's not measured, that's not managed. What's not measured, what's not managed, that's not trusted. And that's what I've seen a lot in the fintech world, from which partially I'm coming as well. And one thing is to optimize, design their optimal systems from the engineering perspective, but the other side is to get funded for that. And this is where we see, coming back to this perspective, this is a huge gap. And this is what mining actually very much well experienced as well. Quite often there is interesting projects, but they struggle with getting funded. Getting funded because mining is one of their highest risk and brownest industries on Earth. And that was until recently not very much was willing to change. And we see now a huge leapfrog from certain projects which are driving the change, quickly digitizing, quickly automating, quickly looking into the remote sensing, remote operations, and enabling transparent, cooperating with startups to build up visibility throughout supply chains. It's all necessary solutions. And so to answer a question, what I'm doing, a bit of both of that. And it took me some time to understand. So if you want to do something, build it yourself, and show by example rather than just trying to explain how to do that. And the biggest as well to how to do it in the fastest and most and they're basically to create it at scale in a collaborative way. And this is where we built in the past ecosystems. We've done it through the platforms, we've done it through the systems enablement, through the connected supply chains, removing where possible intermediaries, and removing where possible unnecessary transactional costs and administrative costs to speed up basically mine to product and mine to market raw materials. But also it's not just bringing the efficiencies or security of supply chains, but my perspective is very much is also, that's why I moved from their downstream supply chain into the upstream as well, how we create positive outcomes and that impact which Tesla mentioned in their report, and how we can prove that impact to the communities, to the host communities, to investors, and make it in the profitable way. We don't need to sacrifice it. We don't need to call it charity. Yes, we might think from a perspective of their capex, and I think it's a creative task here. what type of technologies and design systems we need to put in place to ensure that we as a business are actually profitable, but not at the cost of communities and not at the cost of irreplaceable materials. So I call it just mining the value. And I think that's what all of us here are doing. And I'm very much open, not just for the questions, but also for discussion and for sort of engagement.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Anna. Absolutely brilliant, especially coming in at such short notice. There we go. To speak to us here today. Round of applause. Brilliant. Fantastic. So with this, Anna, Maria's actually put a question into the chat, and I'm going to go with it straight away. So from your perspective, Anna, should we invest more on communicating concepts such as those that you've so eloquently put to us just now? And if so, who should we be communicating to governments, society at large, etc.? What do we need to do to actually kind of get this cranking? Because whilst you said if you want to see the change happening, then you've got to do it yourself. But then there's also a case of how do you then trigger other people to come on board that particular bus to generate that change? What do you think?
Well, it's like concentric circles. I think we would need first to understand, identify, and it's proven use cases and best practices, not just in mining, but everywhere. Of course, we've got to feed off to investors and to their and comply with all the compliance standards. And I think most of the companies are doing it anyway, or trying to, or on the pathway towards to. Let's put it that way. But we've got to look at their immediate landscape or immediate concessions where we create the most of the impact and communicate with those. And it's been proven as well. Why? Because in mining space in Peru, it's not government that just blocks. It's local communities that block the road if they don't like something. And for instance, we can see Chile as well. Well, the issue just grew to the extent that now it's when not just from the regional farmer level where everyone is fighting for the water, it's just like, all right, let's create a referendum. So the cat in the bag, or we call it black swan event, it's actually not just a black swan event. It was expected. It's a systemic risk that has not been, let's say it's addressed earlier by consolidated effort. Let's put it that way. And to be more specific, when I was speaking to some mining companies, I was just too small for them, and they were too big for me. Let's put it that way. But the common sense, no one canceled. The shared infrastructure approach is a very much logical solution was for Chile. And then we wouldn't have seen probably the trade-offs, the mounting trade-offs or multiplying, geometrically growing trade-offs for the water there. However, it's not a one-man solution or not even one-man company solution, but now we can see cancellations of not just one company for distressed or potentially distressed asset, but it's a domino effect. So we can see what's happening. It's a proof basically of negative impact.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Anna. And actually, I mean, one of the talks that if you missed it this morning, so Christian Spano from the ICMM, some of what we discussed during that interview was very much around how do we actually value that patch of land at different points in time in its life, and bringing in some of those more imaginative approaches, just like you've mentioned. And actually where you've got to there is a fantastic segue into our next talk. Ludovine, I don't know if you want to actually introduce the next talk, because you're the one that brought Nicholas to the table, and why Anna has teed him up so brilliantly.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Anna, for a very thought-provoking presentation. Actually, the next speaker is Nicholas Manneling from GIZ, and he is orchestrating with some of his colleagues the Minsus project, which looks specifically at some of the opportunities you've just mentioned, which is how do we remove ourselves from the vision of mining in a silo and actually look to leverage these opportunities much more widely and connecting into a series of other industries and civil society opportunities. And one of the projects they're definitely working on is assessing shared infrastructure opportunities in water across the Andean region, so that mining becomes a lever for more rather than just a standalone and frankly fragile industry that has to justify everything around it. So, I mean, we should look at the recording, and he's going to speak about it much more eloquently.
And before you hit play, don't hit play quite yet, Rose, but because everybody please put your hands together for the fabulous Anna. Thank you so much, Anna. Brilliant. There we go. Round of applause from all of us behind our muted microphones. And with that, over to Nicholas.
Thank you very much for joining us today, Nicholas Menling of GIZ, to discuss the Regional Cooperation Program for the Sustainable Management of Mineral Resources in the Andean region. I think you have a lot to tell us about how technology and sustainability stakes can be combined for better and more positive impact of mining for all. And thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today.
Well, thanks a lot for the invite. Let me try and share my screen. Okay, and let me know once you see it.
Perfect.
Excellent. So yeah, I will do a short talk about some of the work that we've been doing here, which I think, well, our focus was on the Andean region, but I think is relevant for other countries as well. And the title of the presentation is Avoiding the Not in My Backyard Backlash by Merging Technology and Sustainability Drivers to Benefit Mining Regions. Just to give a little bit of context and background to where we're coming from. So you already mentioned the project that I work at, which is a mouthful. So we abbreviate it to MINSES. And it's a German cooperation project together with the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC, here in the region. And that's why I'm also greeting you from Santiago de Chile today. We work in the 6 countries that you see in the map in the middle of the slide. And apart from working with the UN here in the region, we also work with the BGR, which is the Federal Geosciences Institute for Natural Resources in Germany. And as a result of this cooperation between the 3 organizations, we cover a lot of thematics, which you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, some of the topics that we cover. Today, I will focus a little bit on the orange tab that you see there on innovation and technology transfer, and mix it in a little bit with the sustainable mineral supply chains discussion. When maybe also worth highlighting that depending on the field and area of work, we work with different stakeholders. So with governments, a big focus on laws and regulations. With civil society, in the last years, we've had a focus on the mineral supply chain discussions that are happening in off-taker countries and ESG indicators, and trying to think through how to use these trends to also inform their advocacy strategies. With the private sector, we've been doing a lot around voluntary sustainability initiative, and trying to link them with some of the actions that they're doing on the ground to improve development outcomes, and also with academia. So we try, apart from, let's say, mix them and have them talk to each other depending on the areas of work, we choose whom we work with. But as I mentioned, the focus of today, I want to focus a little bit on the work that we've been doing around new technologies in the mining sector. And this is part of a broader work that has been done by the IGF, which is called New Tech, New Deal. And I encourage you to have a look at that on the IGF website. We essentially supplemented the work that they've been doing, which essentially tries to assess the technology impacts on mining countries. We supplemented with an analysis here in the region. And what we did together with CESCO is to bring together stakeholders from the Andean region and think through in working groups what the impacts may be. What we did here, and which I think is quite interesting and relevant, is divide the stakeholders or the impacts that stakeholders felt where you would see them. So trying to think through what are the impacts at the local level around mine sites, what are the impacts on mining capitals like here Antofagasta, for example, and what are the impacts on metropolitan regions. And the picture emerged relatively quickly, which I think also makes a lot of sense, that at the local level, probably the adverse impacts in terms of job losses, both in terms of direct employment, but also procurement, the drawbacks are larger because, the skill sets required for the mine of the future might not be available where mining occurs. And the procurement of goods are often linked to people working at the mine site. So if now fewer people are working at the mine site, then, for example, procuring foods or other or uniforms, for example, is not going to be possible, which in many countries are linked to local procurement. And the impacts are probably different at mining capitals and metropolitan areas like Santiago de Chile, where technology firms and startups have a potential to now play a role in the sector. So a lot more positive if you go to metropolitan areas. And then another not surprising result of that work is that if you coordinate some of this transition with public policies and work together within companies, but also with the public sector, you probably can create a lot higher value than if each one works on their own and doesn't prepare for this transitions. One other conclusion, which I think is interesting from that work, was that it makes sense to take a more holistic view of the technology drivers and merge them with some of the sustainability drivers that we're seeing in the mining space. And for that, in a second phase, we picked out the 5 areas that are highlighted on the right-hand side of the slide, which essentially is shared use water infrastructure investment, nature-based solutions, electrifying mine trucks, circular economy issues, and carbon clubs within the region. And these essentially, what we then did is to create working groups within these 5 fields to identify opportunities in the Andean region, to see what the potential is in working groups that were composed of experts on the topic with experts or people working in the mining sector. And the results from this will be published shortly, but I will give you a brief sneak peek of some of the findings. So, and I'll highlight 3 here. One was on shared use water infrastructure investments. So as I mentioned before, one of the drawbacks of the digitalization and automation of the sector may be that in mining regions, you'll have less direct employment and less indirect employment through procurement. But if you take new approaches, especially here between Santiago de Chile and Lima, which is very dry and one of the biggest copper producing regions in the world, you see that there are a lot of desalination plants in the pipeline that are linked to mining projects. And if you could coordinate these and ensure that these investments not only serve the mine site, but can also serve other actors where mining occurs, then you have a potential to actually create a lot of new work opportunities, particularly in the agriculture and husbandry sectors. So by essentially merging, this sustainability strand with some of the strategies of how to develop new projects here in the north of where I'm sitting, there is potential to create a lot more employment than a mine site could offer, or could ever offer. A second example around circular economy comes from a company here that produces grinding balls, which are used to crush minerals and crush rocks to get out the minerals. And there it was found that the demand for these is going to increase significantly in the coming years. And by using some of the metals and materials that are being discarded by the mining sector, you could actually also provide a lot of the raw input for creating these grinding balls from the region, thereby pushing the agenda on the circular economy topic. And at the regional level, you know, the electrification of mining trucks, what I think is a very interesting opportunity is that it was estimated that about 3,500 large-scale mining trucks operated in Peru and Chile alone, which is a significant proportion of you know, trucks in the world in general. And so there may be opportunities to retrofit some of these here in the region or assemble them, because that part of the value chain needs to be very context specific of where the mine trucks operate. So there is also a niche, you know, for potentially creating new economic opportunities. And so by merging essentially these sustainability drivers and the digitalization drivers, you suddenly see new opportunities that could be created at the local, national, but also at the regional level here in the region. And so I think, you know, that this is probably the way that we need to go, because I think, you know, the message that has been sent out that mining is required to drive forward the energy transition because of the minerals that are needed, and needs to be complemented by showing that future mining projects contribute to economic development, sustainable economic development where mining occurs, to obtain or retain the social license to operate, which in many of the countries here in the Andean region is currently, you know, being disputed whether the mining sector is really the way to go in future years. So I'll stop there, and I realize I went a little bit over my 10 minutes, but I hope it was useful.
Thanks very much, Nick. I don't think you went over that much. I mean, first of all, it's very positive to note that we can really work from the mining sector to develop an entire other set of industries and jobs. A couple of points that you mentioned, I thought really warrant perhaps a little bit more in-depth comments from you. The first one is you mentioned the fact that there's all these opportunities, but they need to happen in coordination with the public sector for the regulatory environment to allow for these. But also, I presume they require some coordination with other industries and other actors, you know, outside of the mining sector. So how do you build those bridges? And are there any lessons or elements of interest that you can observe in your region that you think could be pertinent worldwide to actually spread this kind of positive reindustrialization work around the mining sector?
Yeah, I think, I mean, so to go back to the three examples that were highlighted, you know, to explain some of the coordination that is needed. And that's essentially the other big outcome, both of the first component of work, as how to manage this transition for those that may lose jobs and create, you know, the know-how that is needed for the new jobs. It requires also coordination amongst companies and with the public sector, but also for the second piece. So maybe going back to the examples that were highlighted. For the shared use water infrastructure investment, I mean, it's not really a new technology, but it is a new approach, I think, of how mining has been done, at least here in the north of Chile and south of Peru, whereby, you know, each one got their license to build their desalination plant, and then they operate that. And in this approach, it requires a territorial view. It requires the public sector essentially coordinating the different actors to ensure that access rights are coordinated, tariffs are coordinated, And then mining companies essentially will also have to coordinate if, 2 or 3 projects are in the pipeline, that they sit together and think through how to develop their water infrastructure instead of each one doing it by him or herself. Similar with the circular economy topic. So right now, some of the laws and regulations here in the regions are not actually designed that you can take some of the residues that are used in mining. You can't use them as inputs in other industries. So you first need a legal framework, and again, you basically need a stock take, because a lot of these solutions only work at scale. So if one mining company does it, it doesn't really work. But if you have a conglomerate of mining companies, then you may have enough inputs for materials needed, for example, for the grinding balls. So there again, you need the mix between regulation and coordination between the actors. And well, I think in all these different niches and examples that we worked on, that was one of the main message, that the individual subtopics require coordination, and then at the broader scale, you also need to put these dots together to ultimately explain how mining as its whole, because the public is not interested in each of these specificities. They're basically interested, okay, what is it? What is in it for us? Why should we support this sector? So then I think one of the things that we've been trying to do with this work is to, at the end, again, put it together to explain how these different components fit together to promote, for mining to be a generator of economic development where mining occurs.
And do you feel that there is a capacity constraint, or do you feel that the capacity is there? It's a question of linking all these areas, which are usually dealt with by separate departments, separate types of companies. Is there enough understanding of each other's sector to be able to work across those silos at the moment, even in government?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's nothing new, right? I think that the problems have gotten more complex, and therefore more of it is needed. But I think it's always been difficult to work across sectors. And at least here in the region, I don't think we've made great progress in that. I think there is talk about doing more of that. In practice, I think it's very difficult because, I think ultimately each one is in their own specific niche and understands that niche and wants to work in that niche. And then going back to a group that may talk about other things seem a bit of a waste of time. But especially, I mean, for policymakers across different ministries, you have that problem. I think in mining companies of different departments, you have that problem. So it's not an easy task, but I don't see how we can solve the broader issue of social acceptance of the sector without giving a package that to the broader public to explain how mining can contribute to well-being. And so I think it will be needed, and it will be forced onto mining companies and governments in the years to come.
And there's another stakeholder group, which I think also plays a role now in changing this mindset. Investors in mining companies are clearly understanding that mining is shifting as an industry. Sometimes they're even pushing that shift. But the rest of the mineral supply chain is also now really putting a lot of scrutiny on the mining sector, whether we're talking about, all of the environmental and human rights due diligence, or more generally, a real willingness to ensure that mining is able to meet the demand and the challenges of the green energy transition and a much more responsible view of the entire mineral supply chain. So are you connecting this, development approach with how investors or the mineral supply chains are changing their own expectations of mining?
Yeah, I think, I mean, here in the region, I think that has been one of the most interesting changes that we've seen, is essentially off-takers, either due to voluntary standards, but also due to regulations in countries like Germany or Europe that are putting in place due diligence regulations, not only on conflict minerals, but more broadly on due diligence about human rights in their value chain. So you do suddenly see a change here in the region because off-takers are placing more importance on it. And I think, I mean, you've seen certification schemes like Copper Mark or IRMA or other voluntary standards being implemented, and because I think, you know, off-takers are requiring, which is a very positive development, I think. I think the next step, and this goes a little bit of how to link, let's say, this part of the work with the due diligence work is, and you know, a lot of the due diligence work is focused on negative externalities. And I think the next step is to think through, okay, how can we not only ensure that the negative externalities are addressed, but that the mining sector becomes a contributor to economic development where it occurs. And that to me is kind of the next step here, because if you only focus on the negative things, then you will still not have the social acceptance where mining occurs. Because I mean, if I right now live next to a construction site, and so they try to minimize the noise, they try to minimize, you know, the trucks that are on the road. But I still don't want the construction site to be next to me. So I can just imagine if this would be a never-ending construction site and I would never get something out of it, that, you know, it must feel similar to mining impacted communities, that, you know, ultimately the goal for them is to see the positive impact apart from addressing the negative impact.
And I think that's exactly the point of discussing mining and the just transition as a single topic, because they are intrinsically linked. Well, Nicholas, thank you so much for this discussion, and we look forward to hearing more from Minsus, and we'll look forward to your next publication, and thanks for the sneak peek.
Great, thanks a lot for the invitation. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much to Nicholas and to Ludovine for that recording that was done late last week. So round of applause in their absence. Well, Ludovine's here, but Nicholas isn't. Massive round of applause. Well done, Ludovine. Excellent. So that takes us speeding on. And I can see that there are a number of questions that have been coming in during that presentation, which we will feed through to Nicholas. So, because I think there were certainly some fantastic aspects that he spoke about in that talk. So that takes us straight in to our next conversation, where I'm going to hand over to my very good friend and colleague, Norm Gridley. Norm, over to your wonderful self. Round of applause.
Thank you. Sound check. Can you hear me okay?
We can indeed.
Great. Glad to hear that. I don't know how to remove these faces from my presentation, but that's okay. Right. I'm Norman Gridley, and it's a great pleasure to be here in this conference today with all of you, and all of you online and wherever you are or looking at us later. I am representing a group called the Maine Lithium Communicators, and I would like to introduce the members of this group very quickly, just to say who we are. It is a voluntary group. That's fundamental. We're not a lobby group. We are interested in the just energy transition as it applies to our state, the state of Maine. I grew up in the state of Maine, so did Peter Arnold, who's on the panel here. And I think Art Bell might be there. I can't see all the faces right now. But let me just say quickly who the members are. It's myself. I'm a civil engineer. I grew up in Maine, and I worked in consulting and mining for the past 30 plus years. I now live permanently in Santiago, Chile, and I do risk consulting. However, my heart, a big part of my heart is still in Maine, where I grew up. Peter Arnold is here on the panel, and Peter is a renewable energy specialist and a multifaceted person who lives in Maine. Art Bell is here. Art Bell is an elected legislator in the state of Maine Congress legislature, and he's also on the Environment Committee of the legislature. And Fred Beck is in the audience. He's a geologist with tremendous experience in the state of Maine. And Miles Felch is, might be in the audience, I'm not sure, but Miles Felch is the, I guess it's called the director of the Maine Mineral and Gem Museum in Western Maine. So that's who we are, and we are volunteers, and I'm going to give a presentation on what we're trying to do, and then I'm going to open it up, of course, to questions to others who might be on the panel as well. Let me say also a quick word about our state. Very quickly, but Maine has 1.4 million residents. It's in the northeast of the United States. Almost 93,000 square kilometers of land. 4/5 of that is forested. So most of the population does live near the coast. I grew up on the coast. Peter Arnold lives on the coast. Maine has a long tradition of resource use, renewable and non-renewable, and a very strong environmental conservation tradition. So that's kind of a backdrop to our state, and that gives you a little bit of an insight into the challenge we have in Maine. And I'll try to explain that as I go through here with this presentation. Thank you for that opportunity to present ourselves. And why is my slide not working? It's not moving ahead. I don't know why. Sorry. I'm compartiendo, but I can't move the slide. There we go. Oh, I already presented myself, Norman Gridley. I live in Santiago, and Peter Arnold is here as well. He lives in Damariscotta, Maine. So who we are, I already told you who we are. We formed the group about 4 or 5 months ago, and we've been trying to meet monthly, more or less doing that. I'm going to talk about what the state of Maine is pushing for in terms of the energy transition and resilience to the climate change effects that we have globally and in Maine. Then something about lithium deposits in Maine and how it fits into that story. We formed this discussion of lithium before this big deposit was identified in Maine, and so that's an interesting twist on the story. And then really challenges to mining in our state and what we'd like to catalyze as a group and what are our next steps. So we're really trying to initiate a discussion here, and we'd be very open to any comments that anyone would like to provide us on how to advance. Like I said earlier, we are a voluntary group of Mainers. We're interested in helping our state become a true participant in the energy transition, and that means the just energy transition. I live in Chile. A great deal of the lithium that's needed globally is produced in Chile. That's not to say that's not just, but it means that in the state of Maine, which wants to be a part of the energy transition, what about the possibility of extracting some of the minerals that are needed for the energy transition in our state? And Maine has a climate council, which developed a multi-year plan for transitioning to the low-carbon economy, and this council has a continuing role in working towards those goals. There's a link to it there. Here's a cover page from the Climate Council, and it's a group of people who meet regularly and talk about the objectives and the activities related to the transition to this low-carbon economy. And here are some of the top activities. I'll go to the next one. Maybe I should say the guiding principles. These are important to touch on for a moment. Improve our resilience, okay? Prioritize welfare of our citizens, including vulnerable communities. Foster the use of our natural resources. Doesn't that include minerals? Encourage diversity, inclusion, and utilize the most recent scientific and technical information towards this. We believe these principles really help to undergird the conversation about the possibility of sustainable mining in the state of Maine. So now I'm going to jump quickly into lithium deposits. Given the time I have, I don't have a lot of time to talk about lithium around the world, but there is, and I'm not a geologist, as many of you are. I will say that lithium, we know, is found in both brine and hard rock formations, and there are some hard rock formations that have been discovered in Maine. And this title here is just a great thing to land on for a moment. This was posted in the news, public news, last October. And there's so many things that are interesting about this in terms of our discussion about just mining. First of all, they've calculated the value of the lithium based on 100% of the lithium that's in the ground. So they've taken the market price in October and multiplied to get $1.5 billion. We all know in the world of mining and extraction that that's nowhere close to what it might be worth as a resource that's pulled out of the ground. In fact, it may be worth zero. It may be unminable. It may be negative. In other words, if you took out the mineral, and as Anna said earlier, what are the externalities to mining? Does that mean that we leave a legacy of damage after we mine? So it's called one of the richest deposits on Earth. And then it says, could test our metallic mining laws, considered the strictest in the nation. So this very quickly gives you a feel for the challenge of discussing sustainable mining in our state of Maine. And so here, the potential is staggering. The current value, 11 million tons of ore, 1.5 billion, some of the largest crystals ever found. Pegmatite. One of our members is an expert on pegmatite. I am not, but I know that Miles Felch knows this site, has been there, knows the owner of the property, who's in the picture. And you can see he's got his thumbs up as to, hey, look what I found. And this is just very interesting to know that this is public information. It's in the newspaper. People can read about it and they can say, well, it's very interesting. And many people know that lithium is one of the most important resources needed for the energy transition. It's not the only one. And of course, Maine has other deposits too. But this is one that's come up in the news recently. So then what are the challenges? I've got very little time to finish this, but in 2017, some very strong metallic mineral exploration and mining laws were passed, regulations, I should say. And in effect, as it says to the bottom, state regulations prohibit mining for metals in open pits of more than 3 acres. I mean, right away, that means you could not extract that lithium in an open pit. It just tells you that immediately. I can't go into much detail about why the law was passed, but it had to do with historic mining legacies in Maine. If you do a search on mining in Maine, one of the quickest things that will come up in Google is stopping mining in Maine. It'll appear. So what would we like to catalyze as a group? Well, we all know that the governments around the world are referring to demand for lithium. Now, this is just the U.S. government position. And here again, a quote on the Plumbago Mountain, a potentially significant new lithium resource. This was, the race is on to produce more lithium in the United States. Sure, the race is on. And so what do we do as a group? Well, here's what happens in Maine. If the information is not communicated properly, and people don't understand what might happen in mining, sustainable mining or non-sustainable mining, this is what can happen in Maine. There's a great distribution of power to the communities in the state of Maine. Now, a great part of Maine is unincorporated, so that falls under different regulatory jurisdiction. But for communities like Pembroke, they had a proposal that was presented to them from another company, not for lithium, and they took a town vote, and they voted right away to ban it. And as far as I know, and maybe Art Bell can add to this later if he's available, this prohibits the ability of the company to develop a mine in this community. So there's what can happen. And this is early in the process. This is maybe the company was doing some exploration. They were known. They were processing some permits, or they were trying to. And this is what came out. And this is just a few days ago, or well, a couple of weeks ago. So what would we like to do? We'd like to catalyze a discussion around this, which could involve what? Connecting with our key stakeholders, the possibility of reviewing the Maine mining rules, which are the rules that influence the ability to mine in Maine, socialize or communicate sustainable mining examples from around the world, and then demonstrate how our state could become an active player in the energy transition. Who are some of our key stakeholders? Well, the property owners to begin with, and the communities. Native tribes. We have 4 native tribes in the state of Maine. The Maine Mineral and Gem Museum, which one of our members is head of. The Department of Environment, the Board of Environmental Protection, the National Energy, US DOE, Department of Energy of the US government, E2 Tech and NRCM. These are both organizations that work with environment and technology in Maine, and the NRCM that works with protection of natural resources, the Natural Resources Council of Maine, the exploration and mining interests, and the investors. This is just a starting list of our stakeholders. And what do we want to do? And now I'm almost out of time, I realize, but we do want to confirm these stakeholders and reach out to them. We would like to initiate discussions. We'd like to seek some support for this, some funding support, maybe from the US DOE. We'd like to make fully available good materials on sustainable mining examples from around the world. And we'd like to work together then to advance a meaningful dialogue on the potential to mine lithium in Maine. Now, I must point out, this is not just lithium, but we started with the topic of lithium. But there are other metals that are important for the energy transition as well in Maine that are in deposits, including cobalt, manganese, and some REMs, rare earth minerals. So that's my presentation. I guess I have 5 minutes left for Q&A, and I hope that was clear, and it certainly was quick, but we welcome any questions whatsoever.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much, Norm. It's really exciting what you're doing. So round of applause to all of you. Brilliant. Cool. So I guess, Norm, do you want to bring in any of the team to add to your commentary? Because I know that we've got 3 of them here. Now we've got Miles, Peter, and Art, who have all joined us in our panel session.
Wow, we have almost the entire group. And I know that Fred Beck is on the audience too, so we're actually all here. I would like to take the opportunity to ask Art, first of all, if he would like to comment on the sort of the regulatory challenge in Maine that we have with relation to mining, if you'd like to do that. Thanks, Art, for being here.
Yeah, thank you. And it's an honor to be with all you people that from around the world. It's really exciting. I am a rookie legislator here in Maine. Just completed my first term, 2-year term, running for re-election. And I am learning a lot from my fellow colleagues here. And but what I do know is that and going to discussions like this, I'm learning that we are going to need a lot of lithium and a lot of these other minerals to electrify our world in the future. And Maine, as Norm pointed out, is committed to doing that. We have set out very ambitious goals. So that's one thing. And then on the other side, Maine is a very green, we pride ourselves on, within the 50 United States, of being one of the more environmentally friendly states. And so that we protect that very carefully. And so for me as a rookie legislator to be stepping right out there and saying, hey, let's go after all these minerals, well, would I have to balance that in understanding the history that Norm and Peter and others know better than I. So that's the role that I'm going to play is trying to understand all that, bring this forward in a responsible manner, and then see where it can lead. So I'm excited and thank you everyone here for making this available. It's a great learning experience for me.
Thank you, Art. Can I comment that Art is tremendous to have Art in this group, because Art is in the legislature and knows how rules might be changed. And yet, as I said earlier, we're not a lobby group, so we're not promoting mining. We're not saying let's promote a company or let's promote an investment, even though that's what will be needed to do this. And I really thought the comment earlier about we have the minerals, we just don't have the time. I think that was a tremendous comment earlier by Anna, because it takes so long to develop something. And I've worked on projects that have taken 20 years plus to go from exploration to production, 25, and that's just one. I don't want to take the time from others though. Miles, would you like to say hello and indicate, Miles has been to this pegmatite deposit. So I guess, and Miles represents the Maine Mineral and Gem Museum. And if you do a search on the website, you will find, when you look at Maine and minerals, that's one of the first things that will come up, gems. And Maine is mined for gems and granite. So they call it mining, and it's really is extraction, it's true. But it's not hard rock, open pit, sulfur deposit mining. So, those things are still, shall we say, legal in Maine. Miles, do you want to say hello and comment along those lines?
Yeah, hi. So Miles Felch here. I have a background in, I'm an igneous petrologist, but I specialize with granitic pegmatites. And so I've been involved in a project for the past couple of years, the Earth Mapping Resources Initiative, or Earth MRI. It was a Department of the Interior grant that was given, money was given to state organizations to look for certain critical mineral resources in the states. And so we applied through the Maine Geological Survey, and we were, the museum here, me in particular, were involved in that project. We were awarded some money to do mapping of the lithium deposit in Nuri. And so the area surrounding this deposit that's now pretty well known. I don't have too much more to say.
Okay.
But yeah.
Oh, that's great, Miles. And Peter's here. Peter is also one of our co-founders, shall we say. Peter's been involved in renewable energy initiatives in Maine for a long time. And then Peter, do you want to say anything just to touch on? Because you've been attending this conference all this week as well. Anything you'd like to add? Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm fascinated. I have a side business of being a social worker, and I'm fascinated by systems work. So that's what I'm going to be focusing on within this group, is how to bring this message of just transition and sustainable mining to the broadest population that we can get to. so we can move this discussion forward. And as Art knows, the local communities can block any development if they're not feeling comfortable. So that's where I want to go with our work. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I know we only have a minute, Sarah, but that's why I put that slide in that just came up from May 5th about Pembroke. Pembroke was looking at a proposed project from a Canadian investors, small exploration company, small, mid-size, small, I would say. And they were active, and they were looking at the possibility of developing something in that area. And like, how quickly did that vote come out? So the idea being, well, what does that mean? Does that mean that they could have communicated more with their stakeholders? Who were their stakeholders? Did they try? Was the information wrong? These are things we don't know. But in terms of Maine becoming a partner in the just transition, we know that effective communication is fundamental. And without it, absolutely nothing will happen. And we'll keep using all the minerals and metals that come from all around the world, including northern Chile where I live, where we extract lithium from brine. And we leave ponds behind forever. And now I'm commenting too much. But we may be influencing negatively the environment. I don't want to say we are or aren't, but the fact is that that's what happens if we use resources from around the world. It can happen. So the externalities we don't really know, and yet we live in Maine and we want to use all these great technologies that we're going to use, including the renewable energy. That's my last rapid comment. I don't know if there's time for any questions, probably not.
Yeah, no, thank you so much to Norm, to Art, Peter, and to Miles, and to Fred, who's in there as an attendee as well. Absolutely fantastic. And I think it is it's really exciting to see what you're pulling together at the moment. I note, Norm, that you put your email address into the chat and said we don't have a website yet, but please engage in this dialogue. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, Norm and team. Round of applause to all of you. Brilliant. Cool. Now, I know that Maria did have a question for you, but I'm going to request that she maybe holds on to it until slightly later on in the proceedings, because otherwise we're going to chop into her own group speaking time. And then that might create some internal tension. And I don't want to do that. Yes, Ema's nodding at the moment. She's saying no questions. No. Excellent. So with that, and Norm, actually building on your call for communication and sharing that knowledge, sharing that understanding, I'm truly delighted to welcome to our virtual platform here today, Ema Castellan, who is going to give us an overview with regards to the Geoscience Sustainability Atlas. Now, she also has some partners in crime in the best possible way with her here today in the form of Maria and Denise. But Ema, I'm reliably informed that you are very much in charge of this first section of your presentation. So everybody, please put your hands together for the wonderful Ema. Round of applause.
Great, thanks a million, Sarah. Really appreciate being invited to this session, and it's kind of a bit of a here's for something slightly different. So really what we want to share here is an initiative that we've been working on. So there's a number of us here. I'm representing my co-authors in this case, and it's what we're doing is creating a sustainability atlas for geoscience. So really focusing on the discipline of geoscience, where mining obviously feeds into, but multiple other sectors really feed into too. So what we want to really assess, I suppose, is, and to reflect on, and what we've been doing a lot is reflecting on the value proposition of our discipline of geoscience. And I like this image from Maria, and it's around, that our narrative does start well, and I think we're a very popular discipline, particularly when it comes to preschool and, primary school children. I think if we could do our recruiting at that level, we'd have a really healthy pipeline, but that's not the case. And I think we've kind of realized that there's a need really to heighten this value proposition of what it is we do as a discipline, and look at ourselves in terms of what our perception is to society. Our perception's great internally, but what about to society? And, in some cases, it's seeing that we're a contributor to the climate and biodiversity crisis with our strong associations with the extractive industry, oil and gas and mineral extraction. And the perception out there, and this is what we're combating at this conference, which is great to hear. But there is a perception that that's not very much aligned with current environmental narratives. The queries around what contribution we make to economy, environment and society is not necessarily well appreciated. And I think even if we disagree with these, the numbers are very clear in terms of the reputation of the science is and the kind of reduced reputation is reflected in declining enrollment numbers in universities. And that's very much across the board globally. So it's really important that we reboot the subject, and there's lots of initiatives out there to do that. And again, I think conferences like this are hugely important in that respect as well. But yeah, I think we have an understanding, we have a holistic understanding of the Earth through time, the processes that shape our planet, how they are interrelated, and how we can actually mitigate, how we can adapt to the impacts of climate and environmental change. We're a huge player when it comes to sustainability, and we really need to promote the value of geoscience. We need to safeguard the subject, and we really need to ensure that it has a place at the sustainability table. I know at COP26, I think Sarah had mentioned as well, the underrepresentation there of our discipline. So this really needs to be kind of addressed. So a number of years ago, I think it was 2020, Maria Angela Capello, who's on the call as well, and Anna Shaughnessy approached me as well, and we combined together to address this. We thought the obvious way to go would be to look at the blueprint of sustainability out there, which is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So we took on the challenge to map, in this case, it was geophysics, to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So we looked at all 17 of the goals. We looked at all sectors, all kind of subdisciplines of geophysics, and spent a while putting our heads together and coming up with a map of geophysics to the Sustainable Development Goals, looking at things like water resource management, geohazards, energy in all of its forms, decarbonisation, initiatives that geoscientists are involved in, and tried to promote this and to describe this to geoscientists, but also to kind of the society at large. So it was a really successful, it was hard work, but it was a hugely successful initiative, and we had great kind of reception of it. It was published in multiple publications, The Leading Edge and GeoExpro and Oil Woman. It was also translated into multiple languages, including Swahili and Serbian. And it was used a lot by universities. We were contacted by a number of universities who wanted to use this wheel in particular that we created to actually promote the geoscience subject, geophysics in particular, to prospective students. I think we all have different takeaways from it, but for me, what was really encouraging was to actually be contacted by multiple local sustainability initiatives run by geoscientists that wanted to actually tie back to this kind of overarching SDG strategy. So really, really positive outcomes from it. And I think we needed to think, and particularly with Maria at the helm, what the next steps are. We're not finished with this project, and how can we actually go further with this? And I think the obvious step there was to actually extend it to all geosciences. People were impressed with what we've done, but actually questioned why geophysics. Why do we limit it at geophysics? What about the other geosciences, geochemistry, paleontology, etc.? So that's what we wanted to do as well, was to incorporate all geosciences for it. We also wanted to make sure that the next publication and the next kind of project very much reflected a broad cross-section of sectors, of kind of geoscience subdisciplines, and also of a good global representation. We wanted to make sure that this was as reflective as possible of geoscientists out there. So we partnered together. So we have I think about 11 or 12 people on the author list here, and I think that was the first SDG that we tackled, which is around partnerships and actually uniting several different geoscience disciplines together, and including on the panel here, Ludwin Wolters, who is a friend of geoscience, as she said, and it was excellent to have, and it's been excellent to have her insights from a policy and legislation point of view to actually steer and to curate the best possible atlas that we could get. So yeah, very much what we want to do is to raise the awareness about the role that geoscience has to society at large, to elevate the understanding amongst geoscientists, but also to people outside about how we can actually advance and move the dial in the for all 17 of the SDGs. And establish a communication platform, and that's very much what it's done. We have not published it yet, but even the activity that we've done so far has really caused great back and forth communication with the geoscience public out there, so it's been great. Just in terms of the kind of you know, how the we've defined, I suppose, the SDGs. We decided to kind of categorize them according to the three dimensions: people, planet, and prosperity. This tends to be a better way of kind of measuring progress of these SDGs, but also it kind of highlights the intertwined framework that the SDGs are, instead of kind of silos. And for us as well, it was important to group them like this, so we could actually highlight kind of commonalities between the various different sectors and the various different SDGs as well, and highlight the potential for cross learnings. You know, so for example, if we talk about the prosperity dimension, we may talk about mining here and the cross learnings that we have for mining and the energy sector, you know, from critical mineral exploration and the importance of, you know, better communication there. But I think as well as that, you know, the mining kind of and the ESG and the risk and communications and public perception challenges that lots of the geoscience sectors are facing, but also there's a lot of cross learnings that we can share there between the various different sectors. So yeah, it's been what we wanted this atlas to be as well, is very much examples coming from the ground. In the first version, we kind of talked in theory about how geoscience, how geophysics actually contributes to the SDGs, but it was important at this stage as well, because we had so many voices on the ground that wanted to be involved, for people to be able to actually submit their examples of where they saw in their particular geoscience sector or research area the advancement of one or two of the SDGs. So we have things like water crisis in Delhi, we've got tsunami risks and other geohazard examples. We've got as well an example on the kind of near surface geophysics around mapping of mass graves, you know, in Poland, Lithuania, and Europe. We've got kind of some of the more softer skills needed for geoscientists for equity, diversity, and inclusion in geoscience, and gender equality as well. But yeah, also decarbonisation. We've got some mining examples from Africa, you know, where we're looking at things like policy and legislation. We're looking at how geoscientists can advance or help around the artisanal mining and conflict minerals, and making sure that there's a degree of accountability from geoscientists outside of the hard science as well, or just at least shining a spotlight on that. So yeah, we're communicating our progress a lot. So we've got lots of, we've been inundated with examples, lots of reactions on social media about this. So a huge amount of enthusiasm there. We are still looking for photographs, great photographs of people working in the mineral sector in particular on the towards sustainability. So anything people have out there would be great. And yeah, just in terms of our publication aims, we really want this to be something that's not, you know, that there's open access and it's open to all. We want it to be an inclusive platform for geoscience, that it's not necessarily tied to one particular sector. You know, we want to unite our geoscientists there and show it as a stripped backed kind of discipline. And also, yeah, we've got endorsement from UNESCO here, which has been great. You know, I think this is helping with putting our discipline on the sustainability table with other science disciplines. So yeah, simple language is really important. We want it to be, we're targeting it towards experts as well as society at large. Yeah, so really this is an atlas for geoscience and geoscientists, but also for future geoscientists. And this is just our new wheel, updated wheel, hot off the press, Ludovine. So yeah, any questions that you have, we'd be delighted to take, and I'm delighted to have some of our other co-authors online.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Emma. It's truly brilliant what you guys are putting together. Massive round of applause. Yeah, exactly there. Fantastic. So I think what would be brilliant actually is if we bring Maria and Denise into the discussion. Also, just whilst they're finding those unmute buttons into the chat, I've put some additional resources, which I think are very in line, Emma, with perhaps some of what you were talking about. One of which is this book that Joel came and talked about last year. So I'm actually quite proud that I happen to have it to hand.
Brilliant.
So talking about geoscience and the SDGs. There's also a link to the video that was put together by Ian Stewart and a whole load of other people, a UNESCO sponsored video saying, okay, what do we think the future of geoscience is? And then of course the conference last week that was run by the Geological Society that looked at the role of geoscience in energy transition, and quite a lot of the discussion, especially when we were discussing things online, turned to, okay, well, hang on a second, as geoscientists, how do we get more people coming into the profession? How do we get them comfortable with regards to mining, and also creative enough to work out how do we step change this to actually, well, actually in line with everything we've been speaking about this week, how do we change the business model? How do we make all of this better? So awesome. Thank you, Emma. Do you want to bring in Maria and Denise?
Yeah, I'd be delighted to. So there's Maria, Denise, and also Ludovine. You can unmute as well.
Ludovine's been there going, no, leave me in the background.
Absolutely not. It's great to have she's calling herself a non-geoscientist, but I'm not quite so sure after the number of months you've been spent on this project.
So I think with that, Maria, do you have any comments to add to what Emma has said? I mean, massive congratulations with regards to what you've put together here. It's truly phenomenal. So any comments from yourself, and then we'll go to Denise.
Well, thank you. I think that perhaps the most important comment will be that we want this to be a platform of understanding and communication. And hopefully we will be able to have and build a platform of motivation. We need to increment that kind of self-awareness of our pivotal role in what we do for sustainability as geoscientists. And I always say, we have that kind of perspective vision of the earth, perspective vision of the time. It's not trivial that other peoples call our time geologic time because it's outside human comprehension, right? So this is why we have that kind of perspective, which is privilege as geoscientists, that resources for the human timeline may be finite. So how to use them and how to responsible take a part of that is what we want to communicate. Thank you. Emer did a wonderful job explaining, so no need for more.
There's a lot to say.
Awesome. Yeah, we've got to respect those rocks, haven't we? Denise, what do you want to say? And then I will come to Ludovine.
I want to address the importance of this from the angle of what is out there assaulting our population. We are being raised in an atmosphere of fear about all things pertaining to the earth, the atmosphere, and change. This atlas is one of the most important things we can do as geoscientists, because we can communicate how we can meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs, the definition of sustainability, right? So I would say this to everyone listening: the geoscientists are the people, the essential workers, if you will, of developing energy. We are the superheroes that can come up with the solutions and the way to do what we know how to do, but do it better, do it in balance with economic, environmental, and social awareness. So a pretty simple message, very important works that everyone, this whole team is working on.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Denise. So as we know, the geoscientists are the superheroes, but the lawyers are pretty good as well, aren't they, Ludovine?
Yes, but I just want to say what I find so important about this project is that we have a need of smart policy, good governance more than ever. We need to go so fast and achieve so much. And unfortunately, a lot of these topics are very emotional, very politicized, and frankly, very complex. The scientists need to be at the center of the debate, and I'm not sure that they are often enough, or in every aspect of where we need their input. And I think for disciplines as central to these debates as geosciences, we should be reaching out to them, but I'm deeply grateful that they're reaching out to all of us and explaining what they do, explaining what they're seeing, and bringing us into a more holistic view of what can and should be done. So actually my gratitude goes to the geosciences today.
Thanks, Ludovine. So I think, with this as well, and we had a good chat about this earlier on today, where actually a lot of this is about leveraging one another's strengths and also listening to one another, working together, challenging one another. So we can say, okay, I'm a geoscientist, you're a chemist. How do we work together to make this whole system better? And actually everybody bringing their own backgrounds, their own expertise to the table. Now, Denise, there is a question for you in the Q&A, which I'll maybe let you answer in that online forum, if I may. But Emma, perhaps coming back to yourself, because I know that you're not able to stick around for the panel at the end of today's session. Firstly, and this is on behalf of not just Pauline, but to all of us, when can we get hold of that beautiful graphic that you guys have put together? Basically, yes, so that is the main question. When can we get it? Because we
talked about geological time, didn't we? Yeah, Maria probably knows better on that, but I think, soon, very soon. It's work in progress, but it's we're near completion. It's like a piece of string in terms of when do you finish. There's so many examples coming in, submissions coming in for people wanting to get involved, that it's actually hard to draw a line. And I don't think we want to draw a line. I think we would like this to be something live going forward. But I think I think if you have a word with Ludovine regarding the wheel itself. But you have access to the geophysics one anyway.
Okay, yeah, but we want the rest of it as well, because
I'm a geologist.
I know. I'm sure that you guys are already looking at this, but would it be worth kind of saying, right, here is phase one or something, so here we're at the moment, but everybody then a kind of co-creation type model, so everybody can then pile in and add their own bits into it, and then you almost have version 1, version 2, or volume 1, volume 2. You start building your confidence in that atlas.
That is a fantastic idea and recommendation. We are now looking into having it published very soon, and several organizations like AGU and UNESCO have come forward, and particularly AAPG Foundation, in terms of providing also perhaps some sorts of funds in order to make it happen. Once it is published, we also are thinking about having some sort of a website in order to host the examples and perhaps future collaborations that people would be willing to provide, because we want this to be a living document that at a certain point we want to close and share, to then perhaps initiate those kind of initiatives that you are mentioning, Sarah, which are so important, to have it an evergreen kind of receptacle of information and examples.
Fantastic. And I love it. Pauline is on fire in the chat at the moment. She's suggesting not only that everyone should get a free dinosaur with their copy, which, provided that dinosaur is sustainably sourced, and we need to think about that, because we need to think about those dinosaurs. And then also as well, so Ruth, who is incoming president to the Geological Society here in the UK, actually making sure that it goes out with the membership packs to all of the different fellows, for example. So stuff like that, which I'm sure everyone would love to jump on board with. So with that, again, a massive congratulations to what you guys are putting together there. Be it waiting with geological time scales in mind or not, we're really looking forward to getting hold of your material, because I'm sure it's going to be used very, 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 very quickly by lots of organizations who are trying to promote the same message as well. So awesome. Thank you so much to all of you.
Thanks for having us. We really appreciate it. And it will be here soon.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That's fantastic. Great. So that then takes us into our next session. So we've been Okay, so we're in a world of geoscience, and I have to pull myself mentally out of the world of rocks and remember that there's a broader world out there. You can see my own biasing coming to the fore. I'm sorry, Ludovine. My biasing is there. I'm well and truly on my rocks trip at the moment. But now what we're going to go to, so we're going to go from rocks. Ludovine's a lawyer, so we're going to go into that world of law and then into the world of finance, which is where Guy Winter comes from. So he works for an organization called Fasken. He does a lot of work at the moment with regards to private equity organizations investing in mining companies. He's also working with the UK government at the moment, and the UK government is in the process of putting together the British minerals strategy, because surprise, surprise, the UK doesn't have one, because until a couple of years ago, we were part of something called Europe. And so therefore we utilised what was going on within Europe. And so what's happened recently is within the UK, there's a whole load of strategic work that's going on to try and ascertain what are we going to do going forwards. So with that, Rose is going to start sharing that screen, and I'm going to welcome Guy Winter of Fasken to the screen. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. So welcome to our next session, where I'm joined by the fantastic Guy Winter. So Guy, do you want to introduce yourself to everyone, please?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, for that introduction. So I'm a corporate and equity capital markets partner at Fasken. So we're an international law firm focused on the energy and natural resources sectors. So really interested in that kind of fundamental nexus between energy and, in particular, mining and minerals, which has really been emerging over the past few years. And also I serve with you, Sarah, on BASE's Critical Minerals Expert Committee.
Yes, and of course, during the conference, everyone's seeing rather a large number of people from that particular group in this conference, which is great. So Guy, from your perspective, obviously the title of this year's conference centers on mining's role in the just transition. And the just transition means something different to everybody. What does that actually mean for you?
Yeah, so I mean, really, I think that we're at an amazing point in history where this incredible free ride that essentially the Industrial Revolution and all economic development over the past 100 years or more has been driven by this incredible resource in the energy potential of hydrocarbons. Mm-hmm. And I think there's probably a high level of acceptance now that party is over, that the carbon that's releasing is not sustainable for the life that we want on this planet. And so really, to me, the just transition is how we manage essentially weaning ourselves off those hydrocarbons, how we introduce new technologies, new forms of energy and transport and heat. And it's important to keep all of those in mind, of course, because there can be a real overemphasis on power generation in terms of what transition means, but also making sure that in turn is done in a way that is fair to all of the stakeholders, of course, to the environment, but there are also enormous social implications in terms of the transition that we're going through. And so I think in terms of mining and minerals role, on one level, the sheer volume of material, of primary material that is required to make that happen absolutely dwarfs the amount that we've dedicated to energy generation and transport in the past. We've been able to unlock that amazing energy from the hydrocarbons, and you frankly can't replace that without a huge amount of primary materials. So that's how I see it, and I think it's actually a huge opportunity for the mining and minerals sector to embrace that role. I think in the past there've been misunderstandings about the extractive industries, and I think the extractive industries themselves have contributed to those misunderstandings. So, this is a time when the world needs those sectors, and I think those sectors need to adapt to what the world needs from it. So for all of us, I think it's a really exciting time to be involved in the sector.
It certainly is. It certainly is. So with regards to that adaptation guide, do you think that we are actually seeing that adaptation happen? And if so, do you think that it's happening fast enough?
Well, I mean, I think probably the focus when you talk about transition is that it's not a kind of revolution, and so it is a process. You know, I think we all probably would like to see quicker progress being made, and you know, everyone will have their own view on the contribution that various governments have made to it. I mean, I prefer to focus on some of the positives. I think it's incredible to see in the power generation sector, it's really wonderful what's been achieved. I think the offshore wind sector is one that the UK is justly proud of. And I think, you know, I think it's points away to how we can possibly achieve more wins for a just transition in other sectors. So I think the offshore wind has essentially created financing models that have enabled very large scale capital investment, actually at quite a reasonable cost to the taxpayer, to the extent that during the periods of high energy prices that we had, well, over the past few months and winter, you know, the incentive structures that were put in place through contracts for difference have actually been returning a significant amount to the UK taxpayer. And, you know, that's a phenomenal achievement when you consider that people were saying that type of transition would never be affordable. And yet, not only has it proved affordable, and there are foundations for further development, but it's actually returning money to the Treasury. So, you know, that's a huge win. I think a lot of the thinking that has been done in terms of electric vehicle adoption, you know, is encouraging. I think there are areas like the transition of heating away from natural gas that are still immensely challenging. And so, but we do have some of these structures, some of these ways of thinking now, which hopefully point the way to transition there too.
So if we take what you've just kind of touched on there with regards to the offshore wind and I guess the financing mechanisms in place from that or for that, is there anything that we can learn and perhaps adopt across in the mining space to try and kickstart some of the minerals exploration, mining, etc., and provision? Because of course we need a huge volume of materials to be able to build the wind turbines, etc., of the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting. One aspect which, you know, it is different in terms of the critical minerals that we need today is the complexity and length of the supply chains that exist. It's just a reality that the critical minerals that we need don't necessarily occur in the UK. In some cases, they may. They may occur and not be capable of economic extraction, depending on how you look at the parameters for evaluating that. And even if they do exist, there may not be the infrastructure to process them. There may not be the support industries in order to actually produce that very, very high quality product that you need if you're going to put it into an electric vehicle motor or a wind turbine. And so it's those complex supply chains that I think require the most careful consideration, because if any key part of them is neglected, then you're not going to achieve ultimately that sort of positive impact on transition that you're looking for. But what I think that we've learned from experiences like offshore wind, and I would also say from the energy from waste sector, which has been an area which is kind of characterized by very complex process engineering that cannot be achieved overnight. It is just the model for government intervention to maximize the private sector investment. So where you have offshore wind, people seriously questioned whether that could ever be economically viable, because it required the cost to come down very significantly, but it also required the security of pricing to give you that impetus. And so there, the contract for difference model was developed, not as a handout, but rather as a way to create a stable market to sell power into. And the one real innovation was the creation of the Green Investment Bank as well, which was really specifically designed to attract matching funding from private sector participants. It was phenomenally successful in doing that from some of the largest financial institutions in the world. And ultimately, the Green Investment Bank itself, and again, we could argue about the price for that sale, but was sold to Macquarie and realized a significant return for the taxpayer. So it's an example of a way that you start out with an objective, with regulatory drivers, with transition of power generation as your objective, and find those ways to intervene, but in a way that doesn't leave the taxpayer holding a massive bill. Mm-hmm. Energy from waste, there were some really interesting projects where effectively the projects wouldn't have been funded because they had the initial equity from the developer. They weren't ready to raise debt from lending banks, but they were able to find mezzanine investment from essentially funds which were set up with the support of the Green Investment Bank, and then had matching funding from private sector, private equity investors. So again, really small targeted investments by the taxpayer. And I say investments because they weren't grants, they were investments. Mm-hmm. And pardon me, they unlocked a sector that now has developed in a kind of free market way without the need for continued intervention.
And so is that something, in terms of things like energy from waste, offshore wind, etc., I guess the clear value proposition to the taxpayer is quite clear, because it's almost like, you can see it, you can feel it, you can almost touch it. From a mining perspective, because the value chain is so long, and perhaps even more complicated than what we're talking about there, do you think that the same kind of interventions will work, or do you think they require something slightly different to actually show that value proposition to the taxpayer?
Yeah, I think it's a really good challenge, and I think that one has to consider the parts in the supply chain which need that support, and maybe that are appropriate to be provided with that kind of support. It's perhaps hard to say that when you consider upstream mining, that's obviously a very high risk process, and we all know that the return from investment in drilling and exploration activities can be variable, to say the least. But I think what's interesting about the critical minerals sector, though, is that it forms part of this. We need to see it as part of the end result, which may be the automotive sector, it may be the renewable energy sector, in terms of ensuring that we're able to fabricate wind turbines here in the UK.
Yeah.
And so it's looking at the parts of the supply chain that most need that support. Sorry, Sarah.
It's okay.
But I think that some of the most interesting areas are, for example, the processing. So rare earths is always the classic example that people come back to, but it's not the only example. There are many other, like lithium would be another example of a metal where it requires a lot of processing from the primary material.
Yeah.
And so these are areas where one of the big challenges is the fact that there simply doesn't exist the processing infrastructure outside China. Mm-hmm. And so if you look at the kind of, you can look at any number of pie charts and bar charts to show you you know, the massive domination of processing in those sectors. And so I think it's if you wish to develop new technologies, and especially to come back to your point about the just transition in a way that delivers the environmental and ESG outcomes that we're looking for, you know, you do need to have new technologies, and those new technologies in a sort of complex process are just not bankable standing, you know, in a completely free market. Mm-hmm. So I would love to see that kind of targeted support that we saw for energy from waste, for example, supporting British industry in those very sort of value-added high-end processes, and working closely with our universities where amazing technologies are developed. But, you know, we all know that particularly in the automotive industry, you've got such a long lead time between even something that may work in the lab to actually putting metals into a car. So
yeah. So with that then, Guy, do you think that rather than take the British example here and say, okay, so the British context is different compared to any other country on the world, etc. You know, we're a little island. Whilst we do have some domestic mining, it is limited in part because we're a small island, so we don't have the volume that's there. In terms of that potential intervention, investment or mechanism, actually then focusing in on the processing parts, and therefore in terms of going into the actual extractives bit, the onus is then on that processing company to ensure that what the materials that they are sourcing come from a responsible mining company wherever it might be in the world. So it's almost a case of you've got that kind of indirect just transition that's being pushed upstream with regards to that. Is that a correct reflection of what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, clearly it's really important that the provenance of that material is properly managed. And I think you know, one area where it would be fantastic to see the UK and, you know, dare I say it, our kind of European partners taking a lead, it is in terms of setting those kind of uniform standards that can then ensure that the mining activities and processing that takes place outside is in accordance with the expectations that consumers have and that are necessary for a just transition. Mm-hmm. So I think, you know, there's a level of integration in that sense. What's interesting, of course, is that increasingly you're seeing the kind of ultra volatility that exists in the commodities markets, causing people to look at very fully integrated models. And so if you look at, you know, you'd always take these kind of comments with a pinch of salt, but some of Elon Musk's comments about lithium mining, which is certainly as tough as any to tackle. But, you know, we obviously have seen numerous examples of the OEMs actually reaching out for direct offtake contracts with producers. And so, you know, all of that, though, has had a bit of a knock-on effect. If you see what happened with nickel recently, and, you know, really that's been very challenging because we've seen the kind of LME's nickel market very, very challenged by a number of factors in terms of extraordinary demand side issues, you know, clearly speculation, and fundamentally a shortage of physical delivery. So, you know, these are very distorted markets at the moment. And that's why I think trying to put some kind of shape on it and to look for ways that we can create a kind of stable supply chain that works for everyone, yeah, it's a great challenge and a great opportunity at the moment.
So stability in the supply chain with regards to commodities. This sounds like a holy grail that we've got here, Guy. Do you have any tricks as to, beyond what we've just discussed, where that might be able to become a reality? So where we stop the fluctuations that we do see and that variability to such large extents?
Well, I mean, I think sadly, we're obviously in for a longer period of volatility because, I mean, partly, we're talking about transition. And so these are, if you look at the spike in demand for nickel, lithium, cobalt, people predicted this, but that's very different to the lead time for mining these resources is so long that that's very different to effectively planning for it. Mm-hmm. And so I think, talking about the kind of issues in the nickel market, we've seen issues, high profile issues with lithium carbonate as well. Very, very significant, 250% increase in 7 months. I mean, that is incredibly difficult for people to plan for, really difficult for people to hedge against. And so I think part of it is going to be a recognition that mining does have this crucial part to play. And so it's going to take a while to bring more mines online to supply these resources. But it's something that has to happen, and the industry has to win those hearts and minds to give it that license to develop them.
And so with that, just to then loop all the way back into that just transition perspective, Guy, from your perspective, what does mining need to be doing better in order to be able to win those hearts and minds?
I mean, I think it would be really helpful to articulate the role of materials in energy transition. And I think if you actually look at the energy companies, I think they have been, again, people will have different perspectives on this, but I think they've been quite effective in recent times in articulating how transition works in terms of how the company could evolve from essentially sourcing and a completely integrated supply chain for hydrocarbons to how the role that they have to play in energy transition. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe they found it easier because they form part of, people understand the concept that it's an energy company. Yeah. I think that mining can present itself much more effectively as part of the renewable energy and the energy transition supply chain. There's a kind of educational message, because I still think that there's a sort of atavistic response to extractive industries as despoiling the earth. Mm-hmm. And yet, people may be happy to have that conversation about it on a cell phone, that we know the minerals have clearly been mined. So it's just sort of maybe drawing out that sort of role in a way that hopefully the discussions this week are playing a part of. Also the circular economy, I think what we've seen is only just the tip of the iceberg of resource recovery and reuse. And I think if we can see that level of commitment, if people can think of mining companies and mineral companies and suppliers as using more and forming part of the recycling and reuse solutions, then I think, again, recycling is a concept that people can access easily. It's something that we all do. We have our different bins. I think we get that. And I think it's something that the industry can be much more identified with. And if you think of, there's some really great recent examples of UK companies who have not only been involved in the kind of upstream mining activity. So we're so environmentally friendly here that our lights go out. Like if you just sit still for a second, our lights go out. So. But I think if people, as part of articulating where that material comes from, you are showing a closed loop and showing more of that material coming back, it all adds up to a different picture from the one that sometimes people may have of the sector.
Yeah, exactly. So it's almost that kind of respect and stewardship for the materials themselves. So brilliant. Well, Guy, I think the lights were giving us a hint with regards to that. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Absolutely brilliant. And we really welcome your input to our conversation. So thank you very much, Guy. So yeah, the lights were certainly giving us a hint during that particular recording. So again, just on a live basis, thank you very much on behalf of all of us to the wonderful Guy Winter from Fasken. And as you can see, what he was bringing to the table there really does build on a lot of what we've been hearing over the last few days. And it was fabulous to have a slightly different person's perspective on that. So moving swiftly into our next presentation. So moving from Guy to who is obviously has a legal background, etc., spends lots of time in the money markets, etc., onto our next speaker, who is Estelle Levin-Nally. Now Estelle is originally a geographer, and so she spends a lot of her time working on the human side really of mining. Personally, I met Estelle when we were beginning to work on some artisanal and small scale mining projects together. As you will see, she is fantastic, so full of energy, so full of life, so full of ideas. And so everybody, if you want to put your hands together, I'm sure that Rose will start sharing the screen now. Everybody, Estelle Levin-Nally. So I'm so excited to welcome our next guest, the fabulous Estelle Levin-Nally from Levin Sources. Estelle, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Sarah. Fabulous is very generous. I try. Doesn't always happen. I'm Estelle Levin-Nally, and I'm the CEO and founder of Levin Sources, and we're a social venture that builds sustainable, valuable, and equitable mineral sectors and supply chains.
Fabulous, excellent. So given that, Estelle, I'm really looking forward to your answer to question number one, which is, what do you feel a just energy transition actually is?
Right. So a just energy transition has the word just in it. So I think we have to think of it from the lens of justice. And when I think about just sustainability, actually, I think about justice, and I think about environmental justice and social justice. And I think about it across space and across time, between generations. So for example, I think a just transition means that we manage to evolve the world from practices, behaviors, and ways of living that are destructive and harmful to cultural and environmental heritage and to the potential of future generations to have the same opportunities in terms of a kind of natural resource base and a cultural base for making their lives as prosperous and comfortable as possible and finding meaning. So for me, it's about reconciling injustices that exist between people today across space, but between people across space and across time, so between now and future generations, but also between us and nature, because we are of nature, of course, but we seem to somehow still think that we're above it and we can control it and manipulate it. And in little corners of it, we obviously can, but we're beginning to be proven that we're not so great at that. And these big systems that we exist within are bigger than we can actually really control. You push the balloon in one end, it pushes at the other end. From an environmental justice point of view, we need to reconcile the fact that we are of it and that we are not the only thing that matters. Nature has its intrinsic value. I believe that there should be rights for nature, because I also believe it's about helping any form of life that could have to be as resilient as possible in the face of change, right? I don't think we need to fight to defend every species necessarily, but I think that we need to fight the possibility for species to be resilient. And I don't think we can just wholesale be comfortable with not just creating extinctions, but actually creating the suffering, particularly for higher sentient beings, that comes with the pressures we put on them and their ecosystems. I'm not comfortable with that.
Okay, so with that then, Estelle, because it's really is fascinating. So we're getting lots of different answers to that question around what is actually meant by just transition, and some people feel it's mostly around with this transition, lots of people will lose their jobs, so it's mostly around
yes, of course, that's the main thing that people talk about.
Yeah, but do you feel, I mean, that it's much broader than that? So perhaps the opportunity that we've got, because we've got this change happening at the moment, is actually to go look at, it's not just about the jobs, it's actually about society through time and space, and then on into the broader environment. Is that correct?
Yeah, because the just transition is the outcome, right, of efforts to change us, to take us off the track that we're on, that leads us to really unsustainable ways of living, are destructive of things that have value for humanity and for other species, and put us into ways of living and being and doing and prospering that actually is less destructive and is more constructive and more nurturing. Now, the reason that's embedded for me is because you've got to ask yourself, why are we doing it? You know, this transition isn't just to build economic opportunity, though it's there. It's being done to help us mitigate and avoid climate change and the worst impacts of climate change that are here now and are going to be coming for people and for ecosystems and other species, right? So when you think about the why, it does bring you into higher philosophical questions about what matters, and what does it mean to be human, and what does it mean to be on Earth and to be part of this story and how we impact on others. And you know, it's always been really important to me, and this is why I built Leaven Sources, that every night when I go to bed, I can think, I did something today that has helped make somebody else's life better, and has contributed positively to either protecting others or enhancing them to be the best they can be. For me, that's what it's all about. So I'm, you know, for me, I interpret the just transition through those lenses.
Yeah, no, fantastic. And I think then with that, so I mean, both of us, I mean, we work within the mining sector, we work with other sectors as well. But from, you know, sort of taking that that perspective with regards to the just transition, which is absolutely fantastic. And then saying, okay, so what is the role of the mining sector within that just transition? Where do you think that comes in?
Well, it's, I mean, yeah, it's really crucial. Like, we can't, you know, the just transition means largely defossil fueling us, right? And dematerializing processes and systems through which we can become more efficient, less wasteful for the same positive measure of outcome, whatever that is, of output, whether that's measured in an economic sense of pound or a socio-cultural sense in terms of value felt, right, or experience. You know, so the mining industry, it can't transition to green power, green motion without the minerals that would make that possible, that go into those hardwares. We can't digitize or become AI enabled without the metals and minerals that go into the hardware for you know, for computing and things like this. So there just isn't enough recyclability yet, so meaning that there are some metals that you have to have raw feedstocks as part of their reprocessing and smelting after being recycled. We haven't got enough products designed for being, or it's not normalized yet for product design to think of end of life and repurposing of those components or product into components that can then be dismantled into the pieces that can be recyclable. Actually, within our recycling systems, we have, even just for domestic use at the moment, I mean, the bags of recycling that end up in landfill anyway, because our systems aren't perfect yet. You know, so we're just really far from being able to satisfy the demand that is going to come, or is coming now with this just transition from recycled alone. And therefore, there always has to be mining, unless we consume less.
Yeah.
And this is like the dirty word that people who are traditional quantitative economists go, oh, what? Don't be so ridiculous. But it is quite a serious school of thought. And it is one that certainly the circles I move in through my husband's academic relationships and our friendships is discussed and considered. And, you know, at the end of the day, we can't really have a just transition if we continue to consume how we consume. So it's not just changing how we build things and how we make things and how we make money out of that. It's also changing what we're consuming and how much we're consuming. And that means as individuals, families, communities, companies, setting some rules for ourselves and, you know, taking on climatarian diets, for example, eating less meat, eating, you know, more vegetables, more vegan proteins, these types of things. So it's, yeah, I've gone off, it's bigger than metals, but it's obviously all related.
It's okay, we can go full blown into economics and everything now as well. I mean, so from that, because I mean, of course, you know, the traditional measurements of are we doing well, it's all about growth, GDP, etc. And there are endless conversations around, hang on a second, is that the right measure? And actually the need to totally revamp all of that.
Exactly, which is where donut economics comes in, where well-being metrics. I've got a friend, so in Guernsey where I live, there's a community of us that's been part of something called Transition Islands, founded by a woman, Sasha, I can't say her surname, but she's a good friend of mine, Kavantseva Miller, sorry Sasha, sorry, who's actually become a local politician because she realised that she had to do action. But in Transition Islands, one of the things we were doing within the business community in Guernsey was trying to advocate for a greater approach to well-being, being at the heart of how we measure corporate success and our contribution to community well-being and island well-being, and pushing the islands government to move from these stale, old-fashioned metrics that incentivize us wrongly into more holistic metrics that are more aligned with the UN Sustainable Development Goals and more likely to deliver the outcomes we need to achieve a just transition and to minimize the harms that we pose every day in the little things that we do.
So if we take, say, for example, we take those metrics and we now then, I'm going to come back into the mining sector again,
please bring me back in. You can tell it's nearly the weekend and I'm like, off I go.
So this is something here where, so say, for example, we properly started to measure success using, you know, metrics more in line with donut economics, etc., and pull that into mining. Do you think that that would start steering the mining sector in a more sustainable fashion?
So it's all down to what the board sets as their priorities for measuring corporate performance. And of course, we're all very familiar with boards setting all kinds of targets around finances, and that's absolutely necessary and to be expected. And this is where triple bottom line accounting comes in. You know, are we actually measuring and setting targets and, you know, holding companies accountable for, you know, how they deliver for people, planet, and profit? So yeah, I really strongly believe that companies should be having these other metrics as part of their overall corporate metrics and cascaded through job descriptions, incentives, bonus schemes, and others for executives, but actually throughout the organization to meet so that people within their jobs think more holistically about their functions in the company and in the economy and in society as a whole. And make time for these other things that aren't just about the finances, that are about leaving positive legacies. Because actually, that's what mining companies really can do. Like, the potential is just so big if they embrace it. So many that I've worked with, I mean, it's just shareholder capitalism, isn't it? Short-termist, it's all about the money. And minimal budgets to actually control risks, minimal budgets to actually deliver on something that will really drive change, not an attitude of opportunity capture in the social and environmental development space. Whereas those of us that come from a development background or government partners, you know, that are sitting there going, but what about the nation? And what about what we get out of letting you extract our natural resources? It's not joined up well enough.
So it's almost like the kind of, when we're trying to calculate what is the total value, be it, you know, kind of from a social capital and natural capital, etc. perspective, what does that look like throughout the kind of the whole value chain of that particular patch of land? Because a mining company is just a steward of that land for a short time, really. And do you see, I mean, so Stell, you know, we're kind of talking about big companies, you know, with boards and that governance structure, etc. What does this look like when you then go into smaller scale mining and artisanal mining?
But you know what? They're already far more part of the community for a start, usually. You know, even when they're migrant miners that have come in, perhaps to, you know, whether it's a large-scale mine, they rent homes from local communities, they become part of the community, there may be tensions there. But, you know, artisanal small-scale mining, there are many forms of it that are community-based mining. And if it's not, you know, it doesn't always deliver on what the community needs. There are often really bad impacts that come with that too. And very often, you know, the people that control and lead that mining can have the same money first attitude and don't really care or think about the legacy. It all comes down to accountability structures. The fact is, in artisanal and small scale mining, the social and political side of how you mine, where you mine, what you mine, who you involve, who benefits from it and so on, almost becomes more important. So large scale mining companies do it to get the social license to operate. Mm-hmm. In small scale mining, people are doing it to build social and political capital. So the smallest digger, and I will never forget this woman I met in 2004 when I began working, my first proper experience in research artists and small scale mining in diamonds in Sierra Leone. And I was asking her, why do you do this? Like, why are you, funding a group of artisanal diamond diggers and then washing their tailings for gold and then making soap in the evening and all of the things that she was doing as a widow after the war with various responsibilities, not just for her own children, but other people who'd left, whose children she had to take in. And she said, the reason I'm in diamonds, because diamonds aren't certain. Like, you can mine for 5 months in that part of Sierra Leone at that time and not get anything. I said, why are you taking that risk? She said, because if I find that diamond, I will get respect from the chief. And it was all about the pursuit of dignity.
Right.
So like some of these artisanal miners, like, they are so degraded in their poverty, but it's about hope and it's about pursuit of dignity. That just stayed with me. And it also is part of the reason I have tremendous compassion and respect for artisanal miners, because they are working hard to achieve these things. So it's not just about the money for them. It's also about political capital and social capital. That's just one example. I could go on forever about that.
Yeah. So that word dignity, that's so powerful, isn't it? Because I think often people forget that actually that's what a lot of people are driving for. And again, coming back into the larger scale miners as well, is that actually all of us want to work and do something with dignity. And if we feel, hang on a second, I'm doing this just to make money, dignity kind of, that maybe those two things don't link together. So maybe that's a kind of resounding theme through all of it.
Dignity, values, ethics. Yeah, absolutely.
So with this then, Estelle, and this is then coming back into the question again that we've been asking a number of people here, which is, I know that we discussed it briefly before this. So, and there is an aspect of dignity and ethics and everything that comes into this. Cobalt, which of course you know all about, you do lots and lots of work with that particular commodity. So cobalt, if you had a choice where you decided, I absolutely need my cobalt, I can either get it from deep sea mining, or I can get it from a 9-year-old somewhere in a unregulated environment. Which option do you go for? Deep sea mining or the 9-year-old?
It's a really horrible question, Sarah. And
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's I think there's different things at stake here. There's different, part of it could come down to your values. There are some people who do put the environment first, and they get the big picture things, and that creates fear for them, and it creates the GET systems and how systems interlink, and they understand that by not knowing what we don't know about the deep sea, there are risks we just can't control because we don't know them. And I share their concerns and their fears about this. The other end of the value spectrum, of course, is people who do everything they can for every individual and helping every individual matters, and it's about people. But the thing is, with the child, it's one child, whereas with deep sea mining, it's it could affect so many more people. And coming back to what I said at the very beginning about nature and rights of nature, it certainly poses risks and threats there that I would be uncomfortable with. So much as I'd hate to say it's okay for any one child to have to live that life, I also recognize that and face those hazards, because that's unacceptable and it's illegal for reasons that are absolutely as it should be. You also understand why these children mine. You know, sometimes it's the only way they can pay school fees. Sometimes they're orphaned heads of households. I've met a boy in Uganda. He was 9 years old, actually. He was mining gold. And he had scabby clothes. And like, I asked him, why are you mining? And he said, well, I have to look after my brothers and sisters who are younger. My parents died of HIV, of AIDS. And there wasn't anyone in the community willing or able to look after them. Like, that's, you know, that's an extreme example, but not every child that is in child labor is the same. And so, and sometimes removing children from child labor makes them more at risk of harms. So just to add that nuance and to try and justify what I'm about to say, I would buy it from the child, because I can control the risk there, and I can understand the motivations, the incentives, the reasons, the constraints, and I can put in place things to remove the dangers and the hazards, to perhaps help that child elevate and get out of that situation, so that I no longer would need to source from them. I think that would be my choice.
Okay. So incredibly difficult choice, and my sincere apologies for putting that on the table, because as we know, ideally we would never get to that point. We should, well, I mean, I say we should never get to that point. We are at that point in some parts of the world. And so I think perhaps that just accentuates the fact that actually that shouldn't be the option that we're looking at. And we either shouldn't need cobalt to go into batteries because we've invented different ways of transferring power, etc. But then also as well, actually the rest of the mining sector has actually made sure that there isn't a place necessarily for that 9-year-old mining that cobalt at that point in time. So there's not a market for that person to
And I think, I'm sorry for the background noise, because my 9-year-old is in the house right now and family stuff's going on in the background. I was hoping they'd close the door, but they've not noticed. You know, when you say the mining sector, I want to be really clear that on issues like child labour, it's not just down to the mining companies, by any means. You know, but when mining companies pay their taxes and pay the amount of taxes they really should be paying, then governments are better equipped to help eliminate the conditions that make child labour more likely to happen in that region. And so, you know, there are things that companies can do that isn't just directly about age verification procedures, having the right policy, you know, creating scholarships for children in schools and things like this, all of which are obviously merited and important. But there are other things that mining companies do that contribute to the creation of the root causes of child labour that are massively important. You know, taking a child rights approach to how they do all of their risk management, you know, paying a living wage, ensuring subcontractors are being paid a living wage, huge when it comes to avoiding child labour, and on and on. So there are things the mining companies can do, but it's not just on their shoulders. Governments do need to step up, and we have to hold them to account as well, because in many cases they're just not.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Estelle. So accountability, dignity, thinking about that big interconnected picture as well across space and time.
The whole thing, Sarah, because it's so complicated. I had to make it even more complicated.
Fabulous. So I think on that, before we do get seriously complicated, thank you so much, Estelle. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you.
Always lovely to talk to you, Sarah. Speak to you soon.
Thank you. Brilliant. So massive thank you to Estelle Levinelli for doing that recording with us over the weekend. Apologies for the random box over the screen. Everyone will be very glad to know that that doesn't appear in the main recording. There was obviously something strange going on with Zoom. Who knew? Brilliant. So big round of applause for Estelle. Fantastic. Great. Which brings us to our final main presenter of today, Paul Ekins from University College London. Paul, I'm going to hand straight over to yourself. Would you like to introduce yourself, please, sir?
Yes, hello, Sarah. Hello, everybody. Fascinating stuff. So I'm Professor of Resources and Environmental Policy here, and a relative newbie compared with many of the people I've been listening to on the mining stuff. I came into it through the International Resource Panel, which is set up by the United Nations Environment Programme. And we did a report on mineral resource governance, which I hope some of you at least will have heard of. And as a follow-up to that, I'm now leading a project for them on financing mining for sustainable development. And that came out of the fact that in our work on mineral resource governance, well, firstly, I was staggered to see the number of civil society groups and organizations that are working for that in various ways. I think at the last count, there were about 90 that we managed to list in our report, and you've got a small proportion of them on your conference, Sarah. And we kept coming across this thing called the social license to operate, which is clearly important and has been influential. But actually, we wanted it to go much broader than that, towards a sustainable development license to operate, whereby it became understood that mines did not go ahead unless they were contributing to the Sustainable Development Goals, which of course is now the global aspiration, which I think was a huge achievement through the United Nations to get those adopted. And of course, you were, in your previous conversation, you were talking about the complexities that such a perspective might introduce. Boy, it is complex. And of course, saying you want to contribute to all those goals doesn't mean you're not going to get any trade-offs. You're bound to get trade-offs. And the question then is, how are those managed? Through what sorts of processes and through what sorts of governance? And that's what our report was all about. So now I'm deep in the financial sector to see how the financial sector can try to encourage that sort of extractive industry.
So jumping straight into that then, Paul, do you have any sneak previews for us with regards to what the finance sector report might include?
No, I don't. And my colleagues would be very cross with me if I was to share them with you before they were published. But all I know is that we're not going to get there without very significant reforms to the financial sector. Yeah. And part of that comes from some of the things that many others have been saying before me. I mean, if we take that word externality, which I hate, but which we economists, we always have to use because that's, in Environmental Economics 101, those have to become internalities. And until they are internalities, we will not approach either sustainable development or resolving the environmental crisis. And if they become internalities on the basis of current technologies, that will make minerals more expensive. There's no question of that. They're going to be large extra costs. And then I've been hearing a lot, obviously, about this concept of the just transition. And if the just transition means anything to my Southern colleagues on the International Resource Panel, it means that Southern countries, developing countries in which most of these minerals are mined, or in which many of them are mined, they get to keep a larger proportion of the rents. They get to keep a larger proportion of the rents, and those rents are then used in a responsible way by the national government or by the local community to train the local populations so that they get more of the downstream value added. And when you internalize the externalities, and when you give a larger proportion of the rents to the host countries of the mines, and the mining companies have still got to make a profit, well, then you can see that those exported commodities are going to be much more expensive. And we haven't really begun to, I think, appreciate the implications of all that in terms of the way our own northern economies, I'm speaking for London, from London, are structured, and the way we are using these minerals and resources. But the good sign of that, from our point of view, would be that if we were to start paying real prices, and by real prices, I mean prices that incorporate the external environmental costs and the prices that allow for those countries that export those resources to engage in sustainable development, if we were paying those real prices, firstly, we would use those resources much more carefully. And we would start seeing something of a circular economy, not because people are suddenly become like angels, but because it makes financial sense to use those resources much more carefully and make sure that we recovered them from products at the end of their lives, et cetera, et cetera. And also, and this would relate a bit to what Estelle was saying just before me, we would reduce our demand. We would reduce our consumption. I mean, the one law of economics, which is very difficult to falsify, I think, is the law of demand, which is that when prices go up, consumption goes down. So I don't see how the super consuming societies of the North are ever going to really address these sorts of challenges without paying much more for their raw materials. That has huge social implications in those countries, of course, as we're seeing now with the cost of living crisis in the UK and in many other countries because of energy prices. But that, to me, is what the just transition is going to have to grapple with if we're serious about it.
So with that, Paul, then, in terms of this change that we need, I mean, this is a massive change. So we need something to break, or something to be disrupted, or something to evolve. How do we make this happen?
Well, I mean, at the moment, there is no obvious political route to making this happen. This isn't a political platform in any developed country that I know of that is going to stand any chance of getting elected. I think the one glimmer of practical politics in that direction that I can see is the discussion that's going on in the European Union at the moment about a carbon border adjustment mechanism, whereby we recognize that carbon has to have a price. And if carbon has to have a price, then all these other externalities that go along with mining have to have a price. And that price has to be paid. And the European Union has accepted that that price has to be paid for carbon at least. And it's going to ensure that if it imports those commodities, it needs then to charge the carbon price. And the big question then, which the European Union has not yet grappled with, is who gets the money from charging for the carbon price? Because ideally, that money ought to go back to the exporting country in order to enable them to start producing those goods and services in a much more sustainable way. And you begin then to start seeing some financial flows that can start to break this vicious cycle of the race to the bottom, producing global commodities as cheaply as possible in order to be as competitive as possible. And then we know where that leads. It leads to tailings dams that bust and all that kind of stuff. So that's a way in which I can imagine that might happen. And I hope it becomes a more practical proposition than it is at the moment. But you're quite right. These are huge, huge issues. again, the hope is, and this picks up a bit on what some of the things that Guy Winter was saying. He was singing the praises of offshore wind in the UK. What he didn't say was that in the beginning, when we first invested in offshore wind, when the government first set out those contracts for differences, it was eye-wateringly expensive. Those first contracts for differences went for £150 a megawatt hour. And it was only by putting those first offshore wind turbines in the sea and learning how to do it that we managed to get the costs down. And we need to go through that kind of innovation and technological process in exactly the same way with all the other environmentally destructive things that we do. So if we were to use a contract for difference, it would be possible for a large market. Again, the UK wouldn't be big enough for this, but the EU could. It could issue contracts for difference for cobalt that was mined in a socially sustainable and responsible way with proper verification mechanisms. And then it would say it would pay whatever it would be. And that cobalt would be much more expensive than the current price because they wouldn't be able to do it otherwise. But having paid that and having made provision that that money went into community development, downstream development, environmental remediation, putting aside a sum of money for mine closure, all the things that currently don't happen in the mining sector, then we would find there would be innovation in that sector. New ways would be found for mining cobalt that were less environmentally destructive and were therefore less expensive to resolve those problems. And we would gradually get to a situation, as we have done with offshore wind, and the most recent contracts for difference for offshore wind were selling at £40 a megawatt hour, more or less a quarter of what they were selling for less than 10 years ago. No, not less than 10 years ago, less than 20 years ago. Then we can start to get that virtuous circle going. But you can't get the virtuous circle going without being prepared to pay more if the stuff is done properly.
And so this is something, Paul, where in terms of everything that you've just described there, it takes almost a huge amount of courage for one bit of the world to go first. And so if and when Europe goes for it and says, okay, so here is an ESG price or whatever they want to call it that gets put on top of that cobalt in terms of where the money goes, I guess the pressure is then on, say, the DRC to say, well, hang on a second, if we show we've already charged that price and we've kept the money, then actually that should then be flowing on through the system, or there's something fairly kind of weird and wonderful, I guess, in that. What do you think the chances are of the EU or a different part of the world actually getting on and doing it? Do you think they're going to go for it, or do you think they're going to say, hang on a second, I'm only in power for 4 to 10 years or whatever the case might be, I've got other battles to fight?
Well, prior to the European Union's adoption of the Green Deal, I would have said exactly what you said in the second part of your sentence. You know, this is not something that practical politics does. But given the level of public awareness now of the crises of both climate and nature, and I think an increasing determination to treat them together, I think there is a small possibility that this could become a practical politics within the next 10 years. Of course, we've left this terribly late. I mean, you can see I'm not a young man. I've been working on these issues for at least 30 years. I can see a few people on the panel who are more or less my age as well, and they're probably working on this for 30 years. And we've done absolutely diddly squat in a serious sense over all these years. Well, we've just got to get serious and real about this, because the climate and the biosphere work on its own logic and its own laws, and human well-being doesn't feature there if we don't pay any attention to them. So yeah, I mean, I think there are certain things moving in the right direction, but they're not moving in the right direction anything like fast enough. There's far more words being spoken than actions being taken, and clearly that's got to change. But I think the one thing we can say about the last 20 or 30 years is that we kind of know what to do. That because there have been lots and lots of experiments, and the mining sector, as with other sectors, has made a lot of progress in knowing how things need to be done. Now it's got to do them, and it's got to do them systematically. It's got to do them at scale, and it will need help to do that. Because otherwise the companies that do it will simply go out of business, and that doesn't help anybody. So this is a systemic problem. It's a systemic public-private problem. Governments have to provide the system conditions whereby these companies can behave properly, and that is both incentives and penalties if they don't. And I think the European Union is beginning to recognize that that's what it needs to be.
So last question on this before I move on to the question that you know that I'm going to pose to you, and that is, so given all of this change, for example, that we're going through at the moment. In fact, tell you what, let me come to that last question that you know that I'm going to ask you, and I might come back. So in terms of taking action and making this change actually happen, we're of course left with some really difficult questions that we need to be addressing here, and the question of course is the last one that I posed to Estelle. So we need to buy cobalt. We haven't invented technology that means that we can do without cobalt yet, assuming that there's no middle ground which we can go for. Do we buy that cobalt from deep sea mining or from the 9-year-old? Of course, we are absolutely not condoning any of the child labor, etc., that this question may be insinuating, but it's an exercise in critical thought. So Paul, if you were stuck with that hard decision to make, which way would you go? Would you go with 9-year-old or would you go with deep sea mining?
Yeah, well, as with all these questions, first, and this is something you said, these are choices that no one should have to make, and that it's a system problem, and we need to change the system. That means that those are the only two choices. So that's the first thing, to get the determination that that is not an acceptable binary choice that human societies should need to make. But that clearly doesn't solve your short-term cobalt problem. I thought Estelle's answer to that question was great, because she recognized if you're taking it down to an individual level, a person-to-person level, here I am, I need to buy cobalt, and I've got this choice. What do? I do have the option of making that 9-year-old's life better than it currently is. If I can actually find the 9-year-old, I can go off and make arrangements that will improve that. And I think Estelle said a lot of very good things, which is that the 9-year-old is probably an intelligent person who has taken the best possible option in their social conditions for them. And therefore, not to buy it from the 9-year-old would mean that probably the 9-year-old is worse off than they would otherwise be. But obviously, she then went on to say that both the companies and the governments have a responsibility to make sure that those are not the only options for that 9-year-old. And I would choose that rather than the deep sea stuff, because I come from the environmental community. I was a co-chair of the UNEP's Global Environment Outlook, which had a look in great detail at what we know about the oceans. And what I absolutely know is that we do not know enough about the oceans to get into deep sea mining in anything except an absolutely catastrophic way environmentally. So we just don't do it at the moment. And probably, actually, we will never do it responsibly. Given the economic circumstances and the economic incentives, I'm very much afraid that we will go into deep sea mining when we shouldn't. And that, of course, will only add to the environmental catastrophes which humanity is going to be facing over the course of the next century, 2 or 3, which in terms of my life is a very long time. But in terms of the geological timescales, which with the previous speaker you were talking about, is such a flash in the pan that we shouldn't even be considering it except as such.
Great, thank you very much for that, Paul, and thank you for addressing the question as well. So the final question before I then bring in the rest of the panel is around the perception of society with regards to mining. And I didn't really mean to focus in on Europe, but there's an awful lot of discussion around this at the moment within Europe. There are lots of anti-mining groups that believe that no mining should happen at all, that everything should be happening, we should be recycling everything, etc. Now, obviously, in order for us to be able to go through this energy transition, we need more stock, we need more durables, as it was put earlier on today. In order for us to make this step change, it requires, say, government to actually pile a lot of funds into this system in order to be able to make sure that that cobalt is responsible. Is society going to let us do it? Or is society so anti-mining that there will be utter uproar if we try and invest money in those areas to make a step change? What do you think?
Well, I mean, there will be utter uproar because I'm afraid mines have got a very bad name. They've got a very bad name because miners have not mined sustainably, socially, economically, and environmentally. And communities currently know that if a mine comes anywhere near them, they're going to be screwed. And there are many, many examples around the world where that is happening right now. So, I'm not in a position to be able to say, we should open our arms to mines and say, yes, please, because I'm quite certain if I was living in the country, minding my own business, and suddenly a massive, great open cast mine was to come on my back door, I wouldn't be at all happy. So we've got to find ways of mining that don't get those sorts of problems. I mean, as with so many of these environmental problems, we haven't actually tried to do that very hard. We have tended to still operate mines in a kind of least cost, least financial cost kind of way in order to get the cheapest commodities possible. That's how we farm. That's how we mine. That's how we extract things from the natural world. That's kind of what we do. And we've got to stop doing it like that. We've got to start paying the real costs. So I absolutely agree with you that if we want an energy transition, especially if we want to go on consuming the quantities of energy which rich societies currently consume, boy, we need this stuff and we need it badly. There's absolutely not enough in circulation at the moment, even with 100% recycling. And we know with many of these minerals, we're going to be a long way short of 100% recycling for a very long time. I mean, many of these critical minerals, they're 2, 3, 4% recycling if we're lucky. So we've got a lot of work to do there, but we're going to need lots of these minerals. And in order to persuade societies to allow those minerals to be extracted, the mining community is going to have to step up to the plate. Again, there are good miners or relatively good miners and some very bad miners. And there needs to be a process where the relatively good miners get better and better, and the relatively bad miners either catch up with them or go out of business.
Brilliant. So with that, thank you so much, Paul. Absolutely brilliant. As always, thank you very much for adding into our conversation here today.
Pleasure.
Round of applause, everybody, for the fantastic Paul. Brilliant. Awesome. So now, Paul, if you're happy to stay with us, that would be absolutely brilliant. What I'm going to invite is actually all of our other speakers who are still with us on the line to, if they want to take part in the final panel session, to please turn on their cameras so that I know that you want us to come to you. So keep your cameras off if you prefer us not to come to you. I promise not to ask you the 9-year-old versus deep sea mining question, because that would be truly cruel with regards to all of that. However, what I will do is I'm going to come to the man with a map behind him at the moment. Yes, Matt, it's your turn. So Matt's been sitting with us this afternoon, either listening on Zoom or on YouTube as well. Matt, what are some of your reflections from what you've heard this afternoon, or just your general reflections on what we're hearing in the conference as a whole?
Okay, yeah, so thanks. This afternoon's talks, I thought been, yeah, as usual, excellent lineup, and I really enjoyed Paul's talk at the end, you know, this massive dollop of realism that we kind of all needed. I think I just scribbled down a few words. We've done diddly squat. We need to get real, get on with it. And this is one of the things that I kind of keep coming back to, is like, we know the solutions. A lot of us in these calls, in this conference, are all very technically capable. We know the solutions. We know what to do. So let's just get on with it. In the words of Monty Python and Holy Grail. But the kind of the two main themes I want to come back to, and maybe we can revisit the second one at a later point. But the first one is this kind of world of finance that, you know, I'm an exploration geologist, so I'm used to being very much the person who is out there doing the stuff on the ground in the first place. And a lot of the projects that I tend to see are the more junior ones. So this, what was it called? Stakeholder capitalists. So it's this short-term gain, short-term view of projects. You know, you're trying to make money. A lot of them are gold projects because that's where they can make the quickest kind of cash. And what I see as this big elephant in the room in this whole kind of the whole mining industry is that I think Ben Lepley mentioned it this morning. One of my ex-colleagues, you know, him and I share this opinion very, very, very passionately. And it's that kind of idea that, okay, now we're going to switch to become a green metal, battery metals industry. And it's this kind of both sides of the coin. There's a huge amount of opportunity here for us to make lots of money. So carry on doing what we've done. And on the other side of it, we're doing it because it's the right thing to do. It's a good thing for society and for us. And when you have a business where you're kind of switching from that, oh yeah, we're now going to start doing battery metals, but we've still got this stuff on the side of it. So the example is, you know, with coal mining, I think you said previously when you went to the COP26, you're like, everyone thinks mining is coal. And you go, oh, hang on, we don't do that. We do battery metals. We do this stuff for the energy transition. We also do a bit of gold, a bit of diamonds, but, you know, we won't talk about that. It's very confusing what we're actually doing. And so you've seen in the hydrocarbons industry, companies changing their names to be energy companies. So maybe that's something, the bit change in business model. Paul, I'm really intrigued to see what comes out of your findings of your the kind of your studies. But maybe there's a whole new way that we need to kind of take out those kind of sectors and kind of rebrand ourselves. And I worry that current business models in organizations kind of still stay on that kind of track of just changing the way they do things by putting money into renewables or ESG. And I just feel it's a bit like paying the RSPCA so you can keep kicking your dog. I just don't really know how it's going to work. So I'll leave you with those kind of thoughts. Thank you to everyone. I do have another kind of thing I want to cover, which is more broader for the whole of this conference, but I'll let another speaker go. So thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Matt. Paul, your name obviously was mentioned just before Matt went and said, is it like paying a charity for animal welfare whilst still kicking your dog? Do you have any comments to what Matt said?
Well, I think he was talking about a prospective new business model. I mean, the fact of the matter is the businesses have to make money, but if they regard making money as the only thing that matters, and we must remember that has a long economics tradition for that. And was specifically what Milton Friedman said was that the only business of business is making money for their shareholders. That was posited on the assumption that government was strong enough to look after the morals and social welfare of the nation, because even Milton Friedman didn't believe that markets did everything for everybody. And governments are unable to do that if business effectively takes over government. And increasingly, we're in a situation where that is the case, where businesses are so influential, both through their donations to politicians and through the number of people that they employ, that effectively they can skew the rules so that governments can't look after the social welfare. And the governments, therefore, can't create the conditions for businesses to have different business models. And that is a real problem. And as I say, we got into the politics of this before a bit with the European Union. The European Union is trying to change that equation by making it possible for businesses to do the right thing and still make money, perhaps make less money than they would otherwise make, but still make enough money to keep in business, which is obviously important. But that's still very much in its infancy. And I mean, I think there was something in the old social license to operate that was a bit like Matt said. I wouldn't have put it quite like paying money so that you can keep kicking the dog, but I would say giving the dog a sedative so that it didn't bite you in the leg. It would be more that kind of analogy. A few sops to the local communities so that they didn't protest too much when they were screwed by the mines coming along into their localities. So yeah, I mean, it is. I read this in the academic literature now all the time, but we need system transformation, and that means transformation in the public and private sectors. But it also means cultural transformation. It also means transformation in our minds, such that we start valuing things like the environment and social welfare and human rights and gender equality and all the other things that are in the SDGs. We start valuing them as much as making a quick buck. And at the moment, that's not the case.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Paul. I should just state very clearly that we categorically do not approve of animal cruelty in any shape or form. And this is just an analogy that we're using here at this point in time, just before we all get cancelled or something like that. Norm, I know that you wanted to come in on this and comment, and then perhaps I'll go back to Matt for his second comment.
Sure. Thanks very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can.
I wanted to mention two phrases. This has been a great session. Thanks so much. And I just want to mention a couple phrases, and I just heard the social license mentioned by Paul, the social license to operate, and also wanted to mention the shareholder activism trends that we have now globally with multinational companies. And I've done some work with multinationals that are doing mining in both North and South America and Europe, and they don't all have the desire to do everything at absolute minimum cost, but they certainly are trying to minimize cost. That's absolute. But what I've found in my experience working mainly in Latin America over the last 15 years is that the multinationals who have some good principles driving them, along with making the money for the shareholders, will apply those principles wherever they operate. It's been my experience. And they will listen to what's needed to achieve their social license. And frankly, if they don't have it, they will not develop. They will not develop. They will be stopped. Now, they may be stopped in a violent way, involving protests and even deaths, which has happened in Peru, unfortunately. Or they may be stopped in other ways, like by not obtaining their permits, or having permits revoked, or having conditions on permits. But they will do what's needed. And I've worked on projects where the companies have voluntarily added benefits to communities that are long-lasting. And I mean long-lasting beyond the life of the operating mine. And so I believe that's an example we can work with and talk about. And that really has to do with social license as well as with shareholder activism, because the shareholders of those companies are aware that that's needed around the world. So I'm not saying it's an easy out, but it's definitely a private sector route. It doesn't involve the government. I believe system change, like you said, Paul, may be needed. I think that might be geologic time to me. Maybe not. Maybe we'll be forced into system change. We have no choice. But in the meanwhile, we have private companies that are doing the right thing. There's some good examples. And I'm not here to promote any of them. I'm just saying that I've had that experience with some multinationals, and others here have. And I like to just mention those factors here as part of the discussion. Thanks very much for the chance to comment.
Great. Thank you very much, Norm. Matt, let's come back to you. I know you had a second point that you wanted to raise.
Yeah, so this kind of picks on the whole kind of session and probably the last couple of years of these kind of responsible raw material kind of seminars, and kind of some of the takeaways that I've kind of gained from it. And I'm a big fan of this, the kind of generalist versus the specialist. I think the generalists are much more needed in society. And a lot of, I think this afternoon, people have mentioned, you know, working in silos. We've got lots of people brought together from different perspectives, different areas. And everyone keeps talking about how complex these challenges are. And I think there's a great quote from Isaac Asimov, and he says, the saddest aspect of life right now is that science gathers knowledge faster than society gathers wisdom. And it's that kind of idea that, you know, the world we live in at the moment is increasingly complicated. We're dealing with more wicked problems than we were dealing with before. So what we do today is going to be different to tomorrow and it'll be different to next week. And so it's exactly what Paul said. We need to flip everything upside down and start from scratch, really, because the current way we do things isn't working. And I think we're a bit living in a dream world for it to be suitable for the future. So I think to address the kind of complexity, we as professionals need to allocate more responsibility to the kind of our silos and our distinct specialisms, and kind of look from things from a much more holistic approach. So using those people who are good at connecting people, I'd probably put yourself in that category, Sarah. You kind of pull together these kind of discussions, which are really good. I think the next step is trying to get into that action. How do we get to that action? So how do we get to that tipping point where all of these points and things we're discussing, we know need to do, we know how to do it, but how do we get over that lip so it happens? And I really hope it isn't too late. I don't think there is. I might sound a bit too cynical, but I do have some hope. So I'd be interested to see what anyone else's kind of comments are on that, and how do we get to that kind of tipping point?
Yes,
I mean, a question I'd love to ask Norman is, given that there are good actors in the mining companies who will do the things that you said, how can one generalize that behavior or make it more common? Is that something that is going to happen through bodies like ICMM, or is it something that requires government action in order to generalize it? Because at the moment, you know much more about this than I do, but I would have said it's more the exception than the rule.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. Of course, I can't speak to how broad it is. I know that sustainability reporting from the major miners has been for a long time just kind of greenwashing, you know, and so that's now becoming much more focused as to how they really report to their shareholders and to their stakeholders. How would it be generalized? I think the ICMM is very valuable, but it speaks to the mining community, not to the general public. I guess, and that was part of my discussion with the main lithium communicators, was how do we actually speak to the public about this and say that mining can be done in a sustainable way? I don't understand. I'm not clear on whether governments can influence this. I do believe it's very much a private sector initiative, and I believe certain large companies, I can't speak to the mid-size, I think the large companies that are out there know that this may actually give them a competitive advantage in terms of their shareholder value. And so we were still talking about money, but we're talking about value to the shareholder. And the shareholder says, I'm going to invest in this company because I know that they are doing the right thing, and they've showed me that. So it really does have so much to do with communicating what they do and whether it has lasting value in the community. We tried in some work we did here in Peru, to talk about sustainable communities, of course, rather than sustainable mining. Sustainable mining, those words don't even fit together unless we talk about the 100% recycle, and we still need raw materials no matter what. So why don't we talk about sustainable communities that are involved with mining? And we may want to try that example in the state of Maine, for example, with Peter, and say, how do we talk about that in our state where mining has created impacts that are known? And groundwater contamination in fractured bedrock is one of the toughest things to clean up that I know of. Very, very expensive. And mining has created that in Maine. So that had a lot to do with the history of the regulations that are basically blocking open pit mining. So how do we communicate that there are other ways to do this? I think there's opportunity there. I like it. I like having that chance to communicate it. I don't know if that's just kind of a drifting answer, but it's a good question for sure, Paul.
Thanks, Norm. Peter, you heard that Norm mentioned your name there. Do you want to come in on this? And then I'll go to Anna because I see she's got her hand up.
I've been thinking a lot about the local community in which the potential lithium mine would be. And as far as I know, No one's reached out to them yet. I haven't seen it. I haven't heard of it. So I think that that's an avenue for us to leap from that place to larger and larger systems. That's my comment.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Peter. Anna, over to yourself.
Thank you. Peter, thank you so much. You literally took off my tongue what I wanted to say. I was just about having we spoke to the communities and can we actually develop a mind together in whatever shape or form, ideally brownfield, not the greenfield, to mine less, because as we can see more and more end consumers coming to mine and to build an integrated value chain. So, and I think it's great in terms of the efficiency, productivity, all of those words, but in terms of their impact and local community benefits, I'm not sure. Because what I meant by the slide, when I brought together the slide, if you remember, about Tesla impact report, the reality check, Tesla depleted the aquifer in the United States. And now it's alarming that they're going to do the same in Germany. And where's the communities? Communities probably are not even aware of that. I mean, Germany especially, but US as well. And we all know that US is one of the worst countries in the world, almost in the same ranking as the developing countries in terms of the water quality. So that's the ground problem. Coming to this simple project, this is what Peter said. I cannot talk to communities. Can we just develop? We have enough resources between ourselves here to unite efforts and to co-develop them.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that, Anna. Great. I think with all of this, there's so many ideas coalescing here and everything, which is really, really fantastic. And especially because I think a lot of the ideas are coming from slightly different directions. And it's almost like, it feels kind of like we're there on like a pool table or something. We've got all these ideas coming together and you've got these balls that are crashing into one another. Are they going to settle in something that makes sense? Or are they all just going to go spreading out again? So we're like, oh, okay, well, we've all just agreed that it's a really complex system and we can't work out what to do, what's actually going on with it. So let's just round off today's session by doing a lap around the room and saying, okay, was that if there's one salient point or one message that you would like everybody to walk away with from this afternoon session, bearing in mind we've got another 3 sessions to go until we need to actually hammer out, okay, right, where's the action, where's the impact, and to take the words out of Ludovín's mouth, where's the revolution? Because I know that's where you're wanting to go with this, Ludovín. Let's just do a little lap around our virtual table that we have here. And I'm going to start with the lovely Ludovín, and then I'm going to go to the fantastic Rowan.
Thanks very much, Sarah. Paul, amazing discussion. Thank you so much. And I'm a huge fan of the Mineral Resource Governance in the 21st Century Report. So thank you for bringing it. I'm sorry, again, I'm not going to be very poetic about this, but, you know, we've spoken about mining companies, we've spoken about the regulators, we've spoken about the supply chain, all the way down to consumers and communities. At some point, there's one common aspect to every single one of those. We are in every single one of us. Every one of us votes for a regulator or a policy shaper, buys as a consumer, invests savings. You know, we are the financial community. So what I'm taking away from all of this is the huge responsibility we have to start exercising our choices in that direction. You can't say mining companies need to do this. Okay, so make it happen. Vote for this. Accept the cost. You know, if that means that, yeah, you stop building cruise ships, then okay, are you willing to take that hit? And if not, which one is it that you're willing to take? So yeah, sorry, not very poetic, but very clearly every single one of us has to make these choices now. And it's not going to be somebody else doing it for us. Even though I'm in France, we love to think the state does everything on its own. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Ludovín. Rowan, how about your thoughts? And then we'll go to Anna.
Well, from my perspective, over the last few days and the conference we had in London 2 weeks ago, it's very clear that the geoscience community and political community as well are very aware that we do need and will have to continue extracting raw materials for some considerable time into the future. And we're also in the position whereby we have to extract commodities and raw materials that we've not extracted historically. So mining, the geoscience community, the whole geoscience industry is not going to go away. And that will not solve our transition to a green economy. However, at the moment, as Paul said, it's pretty much the market that determines how commodities get from the ground into our gadgets and so on and so forth. And what we need to look at, I think, is not just from a geoscientific perspective. We know how to extract these commodities. We know how to mine. We have the experience. It's more, how does that activity reflect economically and in a sustainable manner? So what I'm basically alluding to is we politicians and geoscientists need to work together to make the case to society. Because right now we're not winning the argument or the debate with people or society. And I think it's because we either work in a bubble between ourselves or politicians work in a bubble with us, but it's not inclusive of society as a whole. And what it also comes down to is our economic models. When markets determine where mines are built and what commodities we dig up, we very much overlook what is necessary in society now in the green energy transition. I know Ben always mentions it, why do we keep digging up gold when we really need cobalt, lithium, copper to develop batteries and electric vehicles? Why do we do that? Because the market determines it. Profit over people. It's until we start looking at it in a different way, whereby we extract these commodities not purely for profit, but for sustainable reasons, and to really, it's almost like calling for a revolution, a green energy revolution, right? But sometimes that may be what it takes to restructure our economic model around commodities, more so around commodities, not just let's just overthrow capitalism. Let's look at commodities and the mining industry and the geosciences in a different light, whereby they shouldn't be for profit, they should be to fuel our green energy transition, because without that fundamental change, we're not going to get there. So I think that's what we should take away from, and what we'd like the public to realize is that we're not going to pillage the earth and dig up mines everywhere. And we are fully aware of what mining has done here historically, and we are fully aware of what we need to do to go forward to mitigate that. And we are trying, and along with government, we need to work with governments to do so. But also we need that fundamental change in how we perceive, how we act, as a society, as communities, why we consume things. And that's what Ludwig alluded to. We need to understand what our purpose is and what we're going to get from the mining industry and the geosciences. So there's going to be a fundamental change. Maybe we should start doing mining not for profit, but for people, for the environment, and for the future. So it's a fundamental change as well as anything else. And I'll leave it there because I am Welsh and I could be here till on tea time talking, so I'll be careful.
Let's get you singing next, Rowan, which will be beautiful. So kind of describing the fact that we need that purpose that's really there at the moment, and I thought that was brilliant what you said. And by the way, I have stolen the purpose word from Ludovine because she sent it to me in a private comment. So Ludovine, I will give you credit for that. Anna, over to yourself. Some resounding, or what's the takeaway you'd like us to take from this? And then I will go to Peter.
Well, I think it's proof of verification of what we've been evolving into the last 2 years. I think I've started from this point and I will conclude with this point. And I think you've got now, for me, this 2-3 days and their upcoming days is just a verification that we've got enough, right? We all caught up on the same curve, yield curve, course curve. So we all talking about the same sentiment here. And to support Paul's idea as well, we all remember the Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith, but everyone in the corporate world and in free markets world, which is not free, it's all controlled by several MNCs, which are greater than whole global GDP. Everyone forgot, or not forgot, but dismissed their what he wrote in his moral sentiments work, right? where it says the self-seeking rich are often led by invisible hands without knowing it, without intending it, to advance the interests of the society. And without having the natural positive outcomes, we don't have the society. We simply cannot sustain ourselves here. Hence, we need to come back and look back a bit back into the history and bring the best out of that, where we used to have the cooperative societies, not in terms of the political socialism I'm talking here, but cooperative banks, and something that Knights Templars have developed as well, to balance out allocation of the resources and to balance out the consumption and production and also to put back into their nature what we more than we take from that. It's not necessarily, of course, we can put nickel back immediately, but we're talking here about their real offsets, not the nominal ones, so we can sustain the path of development and hence unlock the new markets and unlock new opportunities for, especially for deprived and marginalized communities. And the best probably example in the developed world, could have gone wrong and was gone wrong by all means, by ignoring a lot of facts and risks, is Ukraine. It's a country where I'm coming from. It's a war which has happened in the middle of 21st century, in the middle of Europe, and it's number 4 richest resource country in the world. Guys, this is not a joke. This is where the world is rolling into, and it expands and really go in scale. Not, I mean, from Ukraine, but this is an evident example how this evidence of the system's collapse and the failure. And ideally, what we can, and take it from here, how to ensure sustainability. And I think that's conservation discussion is economic discussion. It has to come back. The stewardship has to come back into the discussion. And I think that's what we've all been talking here from a different perspective. Geoscience, community, economics, finance, capital, legal. Just putting this all now together, starting the use cases, identifying those use cases all together with you, identifying where we can start it in the easiest possible way. And I really like Ludwin's as well comment. Let's not tell someone what to do. Let's not ask how someone has to communicate or someone has to mine or develop their businesses. Let's just do it ourselves. I'm at the point where it's like, all right, let's build a mining company. Fine. After 2 years. So, and I would love to have this joint effort to develop that. So why someone can, why we can't. So exploring the best possible fit for that, fit for purpose, where we can showcase it as a pilot, why not? And I think we can take it from there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Anna. And thank you also for bringing the situation in the Ukraine into the room as well, because it's such an important issue. And as you're saying right now, this is it. We're in 2022 and look what is happening. Gone are the days when we can be surprised by what's going on in the world right now. And by the way, I absolutely love the picture that is behind you on the wall. It's genius. So thank you very much. Great. Thank you very much, Anna. Peter, do you have any comments you would like to bring into the room? And then I'll go to Norm.
Thank you. And thank you for the day. It's been a wonderful day. I've been just ruminating about systems thinking and realizing that we have all of these constituencies. This is our little project in Maine. And the US Department of Energy has asked how to incentivize local production of critical minerals. So our communication project could address that. So I want to ask them for money that would allow us at each systems level to ask questions to find out what each of those levels wants to know, and then provide those answers so that they can all participate in this dialogue, in this question of what would be a just transition and how can Maine participate in that. But I think that we don't know what the questions are. So we can't, for each constituency, so we can't answer them clearly. So they can't yet participate in the dialogue. That's what I want to get some money to do.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that, Peter, and good luck with all of that. Brilliant. Fantastic. Norm, how about yourself? And then we'll come to Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Peter, for identifying that we need to look for some money. It's true. Look, I appreciate this very much as well. I'm going to try to not do what Rowan wanted to do too, which is talk all afternoon about it. But I will say this. I think, and for those of us in the world who have consumer choice, and billions don't, right? Billions have limited choice of what they can buy and how they survive with their families for, well, Anna's mentioned Ukraine. That's a new case. But how about all the countries in Africa where Coca-Cola is cheaper than water? What is that? What kind of a world do we live in where that's the case? That's always blown me away when I've heard that. I haven't looked at it lately, but I bet it still is. We have consumer choice though, right? So many of us have the choice to make the right purchase. And I remember so well in Canada and the US, where I lived for the first 3/4 of my life, the Fair Trade program, where I could buy a product that I knew was certified, helping the people who made it. And I'm not sure how well that program has been certified or proven, but I felt good about it as a consumer, and I would pay more. Here in Santiago, I go to small shops and pay more. Absolutely. I don't go to the big chains. I have the choice. But where do I have that choice in, say, copper? Or in buying a car? I'm not going to buy a new car, probably, but my electronics. If I could buy something electronic that said, this product contains certification, right? And I know that that's better, and I know that it's sustainable mining that supported it, and I know there's some efforts out there to try to get there. I understand that. I would make the choice. And then we need to communicate to people how that choice will work. Now, some of us are faced with products that will go up in price no matter what. Here in Chile, our water will probably cost in Santiago 4 times what it does today in 10 years. I'm certain of it, because we will have to desalinate. So people will be faced with that. They'll have no choice. But what about today? Do we have a choice? Like, is there some way we could maybe offset that impact later by making a better choice today? Same with our electricity. Again, I don't know how to end my comment except to say I believe consumers have all kinds of power in this. And I guess the shareholders do too in those companies that they support. But certainly as consumers, where we buy everything every single day, if we could make choices that we knew were truly more sustainable, many of us would do it. I certainly would. And I would be happy to promote it with anyone that I work with and know. And thanks a lot for the session.
Thank you very much, Dawn. Brilliant. Paul, how about yourself? And then we'll finish off with Matt.
Yeah, well, thank you. Lots of interesting thoughts there. I mean, I guess my jumping off point will be some of the comments of Rowan when he started talking a bit about the economy. I think the thing that we mustn't forget is that the economy is the way it is because we made it like that. It is the natural result of the incentive structures which governments largely have created, and of our preferences and choices that we make. And unfortunately, most people are not like Norman. They don't buy the good thing, they buy the cheap thing. And that is a well-established fact. I founded an organization called New Consumer in 1990, precisely to promote the kind of consumption that Norman's talking about. And we've seen a bit of that. But everything I've learned since then is that that's between maximum 5 and 10% of the market. And the other 90% is what's screwing us up. But it doesn't have to be like that. We can change incentive structures. We can change what it is that companies will do. They've obviously got to make money because otherwise they go out of business. But there's a whole heap of ways of changing incentive structures so that they do other things. There's a wonderful comment from someone called Graham Mackenzie in the question and answer. He's asked me a very complicated question, which I can't begin to answer now. But basically, it's to do with trust. Basically, his question is, why should people do something if they don't trust the other party to do what they say they're going to do? And clearly, we have got in our reformed economic system to have much more trust than we currently have, that when people say they're doing things in a certain way, they are, and there are the monitoring and verification systems to make sure that they are, and that governments have in place the incentive and penalty structures that will ensure that the economy works the way that we want it to work, And of course, Ludovín's absolutely right. We're all shareholders, we're all consumers, we're all voters in those countries where we're lucky enough to have votes. And we therefore have a certain amount of influence in order to change the economic system and the way that it operates. But we shouldn't be surprised about the way it operates. It operates because we've designed it like that. That's why it does what it does. And yeah, I'm all for trying to change that.
Brilliant. Bring it on, Paul. Fantastic. And finally, Matt, over to yourself.
Okay, yeah, trying to follow up with everyone. Yeah, so I really echo some of what Anna said. You've really inspired me to be, yeah, if I actually believe about something, maybe just go out and do it, stop hanging around. And exactly what everyone else on this kind of call said, we all got the skills, so maybe we just need to get on with it. And it's that kind of idea of the tragedy of the commons, you know, that we've got this, you know, shared use of a resource, our planet, and these kind of materials, but we all act in our own self-interest until something pushes in the other way. And I have another analogy. It's like me standing at people queuing up in COVID to get all of their toilet roll, and me going, that's not a good thing to do. You know, there'll be lots more of it, so don't worry. And it's just not how the world works. So let's get out there and do something about it. And the big thing for me is innovation. The way we've done it is clearly not working. You know, we need new people thinking of new ideas, pushing for that change, and innovation is one of the best ways to kind of make that happen. So yeah, that's great. Thanks everyone for participating. Really rewarding. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much, Matt. So everybody, thank you so much for today's session. We've gone from dinosaurs to donuts to dignity into full-blown revolution and setting up our own company, which I think is going to be called something which involves those various words, which is absolutely brilliant. Looking forward to it, everybody. You know, we can have our first session, you know, kind of Friday afternoon, something like that. After we get to the end of the conference, we can work out how this company is actually going to work. Does that sound good for everyone?
Bring your spades.
Bring your, yeah, exactly. We call it bring your shovel. I don't know, something like that. So fantastic. Thank you so much to everybody. I think Ludovín's cat is indicating that it might be time to stop this session now. Just as a reminder, we are starting again tomorrow morning for session, hang on a second, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So session 6 tomorrow morning of 8, starting off at 8 o'clock in the morning. And we're actually going to start off by hearing from the Development Partnership Institute. So Wendy and Alison, they've been running all kinds of events at the Indaba conference in South Africa over the last 3 days, all around, and they've basically been running pitch battles for innovations with regards to sustainability in mining. Okay, so they're going to come to us and say, hey, this is what happened. So Matt, to your question or to your suggestion there about innovation, let's hear what everyone's been talking about in South Africa. So that is going to start off tomorrow morning at probably about 20 minutes past 8 is when we're going to get going with Wendy and Alison. And then after them, we've got a whole fantastic lineup of absolutely brilliant speakers for you. So everybody, we look forward to seeing you at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. If that's the wrong time zone for you because you might be in the Americas or something like that, then we'll see you at 3 o'clock UK time tomorrow afternoon, where again, we've got a phenomenal lineup that includes people who know the inner workings of those ESG ratings organizations. We've got the chief scientific advisor to one of the main departments for the UK government. We've got people who work for those mining companies, etc., etc. It's going to be truly glorious. So thank you very much, everybody. A massive round of applause to our speakers from this session here today. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for that. One of these days, we're actually going to have to clap properly one another, aren't we? Rather than the silent clapping at the microphone. But thank you so much. Bring on the revolution. There we go. We can edit that bit out. Thank you so much, everybody. See you tomorrow. Thank you.